Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Itachi and Kisame succeeded in capturing Naruto part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Naruto would have liked to pretend that he didn't know how he and Kisame ended up at a bar, but that would have been a lie, and though he couldn't care less about what he said to most other people, he had never made a practice of lying to himself. They had succeeded in their mission, but that was a given. The day the four of them failed at something was the day Naruto went back to Konoha. And that was the problem. Less than 2 days after Gaara had smothered that fat, corrupt beyond belief representative from the Cloud Country, and something less than an hour after they had gotten back to headquarters, the council had summoned them, and informed the exhausted, fine, only Naruto and Kisame were tired in the least, but hell, it was his inner monologue, assassins, that they would be leaving the next day. On another mission. To Konoha. To have a conference with the local shinobi and their Hokage, all of whom thought he was dead. He really didn't want to explain why he wasn't. You aren't near drunk enough. Pound back another one. I want to be absolutely plastered by the time we stagger out of here. You're the fox. He normally wasn't in the habit of listening to Kyubi, but hey, when a guy's right, he's right. He reached for the sake bottle. A hand gripping his wrist stopped him. Brat, I'm pretty sure 3's your limit. You're on 7. I'm cutting you off. I'm fine. A sudden array of stars crossed Naruto's vision as he crashed to the floor. The bar's denizens glanced at the source of the sound, but the sight of a kid drunk off his ass was nothing new. They went back to their drinks. If you were fine, you could have dodged that in your sleep. Go back to your partner. We leave tomorrow, and you really don't want the hangover. Naruto hauled himself to his feet. He was tired, angry, and nervous as hell, but right now angry was all he could deal with. I'm not a kid, you're not my father, and I can get as drunk as I want. Why had he invited the fucking shark along anyway? Just because he was the only other of the four who would even consider drinking before a mission didn't mean he had to ask him. He could have asked. Come alone, hell, drinking wasn't a team sport, for fuck's sake. Just because Itachi and Kisame were the most celebrated partnership in the Akatsuki, just cause he and Gaara were demons in human form, that's what a lot of people called them. Naruto didn't buy it. Demons didn't give a shit about what former friends thought. They didn't even have former friends to worry about. They got all the kamikaze missions, or at least all the stupidly painful ones. Whose bright idea was it to have missing Nins of Konoha, and their partners, go to Konoha to hammer out a truce? It was a terrible idea. Offhand, he couldn't think of anyone on the council who was brain damaged, but obviously they were all equally demented and Naruto just hadn't noticed. That's what I get for sleeping through the briefings. Itachi hadn't been happy. Neither had anyone else, but Itachi was the most pissed about it, besides Naruto. But Naruto was more depressed, angry than homicidally inclined, and Itachi's anger was far more impressive. Not that anyone outside the four could tell, it took years of experience to know the difference between the "you are idiots I flash" and the "get out of the blast radius, you fools, I flash." It had definitely been the latter, and Naruto had wished desperately to be nearer to the door. Things had almost gone downhill from there, but Kisame had mentioned dinner, and Itachi recognized the distraction for what it was, accepted it, and left, presumably to brood, which he did much better than Sasuke. Of course, Itachi did everything better than Sasuke, except for the spoiled child act, but that wasn't a particularly worthy achievement. It was probably that exact act that Itachi wanted to avoid by staying away from the land of his origin. His little brother was even more annoying than other people's little brothers. You'd think after 8 years a guy would get over the murder of his family already. Gaara disappeared about 5 minutes later, to find a place to meditate, most likely, which left only Naruto and Kisame was already walking off. Naruto hadn't wanted to be alone just then, so he tagged along. It had probably been pity on Kisame's part that they ended up at a ramen shop and not one of the sushi places that the former Miss Shinobi favored. They ate in silence, and the owner knew better than to bother two ninja in bad moods, despite one of them being his best customer. When Naruto reached for his money pouch and realized he had left it back at his apartment, it was a toss-up between pity and the desire to avoid property damage. Naruto was prone to this when frustrated, that Kisame paid for his dinner as well his own. Standing in the doorway of the apartment he shared with his partner, and seeing a distinct lack of Gaara, Naruto made a split-second decision, snatched his yen off the dresser and ran over to where Kisame was entering his own place. This was across the hall from Naruto's location of residence, so took less than a few seconds, and suggested they hit the slosh stove before turning in. Kisame, apparently, had used up his well of charity for the week, and only agreed after Naruto said he was paying. Kisame also took the time to mention that Naruto was going to have a pretty hard time getting a drink seeing as they usually didn't let children into bars. Naruto glared up at the taller shinobi. Sometimes there were disadvantages to knowing someone so well they knew all your weak spots. A combination of youthful features and a less than impressive stature made Naruto seem younger than he really was, and getting carded every time they went anywhere was starting to become a sore point with him. Even though the less than subtle insult made him bristle, Naruto kept himself from saying the first cutting thing that came to mind, as he wasn't really in the mood for a full-out shouting match. 7 drinks later, a fight was sounding much more appealing. And that, Naruto concluded glumly while he pulled himself out of the wall Kisame had thrown him through, was exactly how he and Kisame had ended up at a bar. Well, not exactly. It perhaps would be more interesting to find out how he and Kisame had gotten to a point in their relationship, thankfully platonic, as Naruto couldn't have dealt with another person hitting on him. He didn't know how Itachi got through each day without killing someone. This deserves another brackets, as in fact Itachi rarely went through a day without ripping someone's throat out. But Naruto had a minor concussion and couldn't be bothered with the details, when Naruto could invite him out. Forsake drinking in a seedy bar on the bad side of town, considering 4 years ago Naruto was ready to tear the shark man's head off at the slightest opportunity. Not that an opportunity ever came. Binding seals were such a bitch. However, Naruto was less worried about the past and in a complete panic about the future, and gave himself a mental stomp after his short bout of reminiscing. It wasn't really worth getting hit by Kisame again for one more drink, and Naruto stumbled towards the door before his partner in bar hopping reminded him he was paying. He really would have hit him if the bastard would stand still for 2 seconds. Huh. Guess he was drunker than he originally thought. Life sucked that way. Now, onto the real dilemma. How was he going to break it to Hinata that his reason for standing her up wasn't, well, death? She actually believed all that nothing can tear you away from me true love bullshit. He'd have to ponder that one for a while, or he'd probably screw it up in some unfathomable way. Girls were complicated about that sort of thing. Despite Kisame's attempts to keep him some distance away from dead drop drunk the night before, Naruto still woke up the next day with a pounding headache that felt like some particularly vicious ghost was throwing rocks inside his skull. Heavy, sharp rocks. A never-ending pile of them. Probably that stupid Jounin from the Stone Country who had challenged him last week. Opening his eyes proved to be a mistake. Gaara, though not unattractive, was not the most pleasant person to wake up to. You were out drinking again. This might have sounded accusatory coming from anyone else, but Gaara's tone, as usual, was uninterested. However, first thing in the morning Naruto wasn't up to criticism. Yeah? What of it? We have a mission today. No, really? While he might have said this out loud to anyone else, the sarcasm was wasted on Gaara. The Sannin would give him one of those inscrutable looks that said you are wasting air simply by existing, get up, and leave. So instead, Naruto sighed and pulled the covers back over his head. Yeah, well, wake me up 5 minutes before we leave. We are leaving now. Huh. Now thoroughly awake, Naruto looked at his bedside alarm clock in dread. 9:30. He had set the thing for 8. Whoa. You slept through your alarm again. Why didn't you get me? I wasn't here. Of course. Gaara slept rarely. Most of the night he spent meditating in the woods or talking to himself. Or brewing coffee, which no one else could drink, as induced insomnia for up to 3 weeks. This had been proven on an unknowing test subject, who thought it was decaf. Kabuto still can't handle the strong stuff, Naruto thought to himself, and snickered. The healing shinobi had joined the Akatsuki after a rather brutal fight with Orochimaru, starting with "We never talk anymore" and ending with 5 broken ribs, a broken nose and 2 black eyes. Which is why Kimimaro finally learned never to walk in on those two when they're having a row. How long did that idiot take to heal? A month? They had since made up, but decided it was probably not the best idea to be dating when one of them worked for the other, so Kabuto stuck with the Akatsuki. He rarely went on missions, but was usually the one to patch up the members who were wounded while completing their assignments. As a former member, Orochimaru was allowed on the grounds without being brutally slaughtered, and they were kind of sweet together, in a disturbing, psychopathic, kinky sort of way. Shit! Back to the present, where Naruto was late. He threw on his clothes as fast as possible, but he'd barely gotten his pants on when someone threw open the door right into Naruto's nose. Kid, you're slowing us. What happened to you? Kisame, Naruto noted sourly, showed no traces of a hangover, and in fact looked disgustingly sober. The door attacked me? What again? Before Naruto could think up a suitable response to this, Itachi walked into the room. We are leaving. And that was it. Naruto wasn't the sharpest shuriken in the pouch, but even he knew no one argued with Itachi. No one. Except for this very stupid innkeeper. I'm sorry, we're full. Excuse me? Itachi's voice was calm. Polite even. Naruto backed up a couple of feet and started looking for possible escape routes. Gaara didn't visibly tense, but the sand shifting around his feet let the blonde shinobi know of the Sannin's agitation. Kisame didn't move at all, but Naruto had long since accepted the fact that Kisame would probably kill himself if he thought it would please Itachi. The last two rooms were taken a few minutes ago by a nice young group of kids. The old man shrugged. Sorry, not looking particularly apologetic. Itachi was quiet for a moment. Are there any other inns in town? Yes, but they're all full too. The spring festival starts tomorrow, and it's very popular. It is raining outside. Can't do anything about that. What rooms were the last guests in? Let me see. The innkeeper ruffled through his registration book. Ah, here we are. 12 and 13, second floor. Itachi glanced behind him. Gaara? The scarlet-haired shinobi nodded and turned towards the stairs. The innkeeper started to protest, but one look at Itachi's now blood-red eyes made the old man suddenly very interested in the floor. Upstairs, there was one muffled scream, and then silence. Gaara came back down. Itachi looked at the innkeeper. The rooms are now free. Another eye flash. Sure. Names? Red Moon. Again came out the book. Some names were furiously scribbled out, and another scratched in. Naruto couldn't figure out why Itachi insisted on using the moniker. If anyone who knew what the Akatsuki were for some reason actually saw the registration book, they would know what Red Moon meant. Sometimes Naruto thought Itachi did stuff just because he thought it looked cool. Like coming to Konoha in disguise, wearing cloaks with red clouds that couldn't be more conspicuous if they had yellow rubber duckies all over them. Or using Red Moon to hide their identities, which, while sounding admittedly awesome, really didn't do much to keep them unnoticeable. Neither did killing a bunch of people for their rooms, but Naruto was willing to concede on that one. No way was he going to sleep in the rain when there were nice warm beds around. I would give you your keys, but the previous occupants. Gaara held out 2 keys. Both were dripping blood mixed with sand onto the floor. The innkeeper's voice faded, but he valiantly tried to keep his professionalism. Ah, there they are. Gaara handed 1 key to Itachi. This is for room 13. Watch out for the body of the girl. Mother was already full by the time we got to her. Kisame grinned. Good for me. I'm starving. Naruto could never tell if Kisame was joking when he talked like that. Probably was. He had looked slightly queasy when Naruto had offered him the liver of that sumo wrestler last month. Not that Naruto could blame him. Even in fox form, fatty foods didn't really agree with him. He had been sick the next day. Puking up the small intestine hadn't been a pleasant experience. Stupid doctors. No matter what they said, the small intestine was anything but. Naruto fell back onto the bed with a satisfied sigh. He had half expected to find the room strewn with blood, but Shikaku was very thorough when hungry. He couldn't see signs of murder anywhere. The headache had disappeared by lunchtime. Naruto knew it was due in no small part to his demon-enhanced healing abilities, but he was grateful for it just the same. They had been walking all day, Naruto grumbling under his breath through the morning because of the missed breakfast, but his temper had eased when the town they had come to at noon had a ramen shop with barbecue pork, which tasted wonderful, as hungry as he was. The journey had been made in silence, which Naruto still wasn't used to, even after almost 4 years of being with Kisame and Itachi on missions, and being partnered with Gaara for 2. It was still a little eerie. Back when he was a genin, Sasuke had been the most silent of the group, and even he had felt the need to say something sarcastic at least once every 15 minutes. But Itachi and Gaara spoke rarely, and Kisame was inclined to brooding when left alone with his thoughts. All of this left Naruto with very little to do, so he tended to be the one to scout ahead, playing games with himself as to how close he could get to the group before someone spotted him. Not very. Powerhouse he may be, but by shinobi standards he was outright loud, though his stealth abilities were much improved in comparison to before. It had started raining in the late afternoon, and had only gotten worse as the day wore on. Itachi had borne it stoically, Kisame had seemed to enjoy it in some weird way, and Gaara's sand as always protected him, no matter how silly it looked to have an umbrella of dirt. Naruto hated rain. It was cold, miserable, and killed his enhanced smell and hearing, so he felt half blind. The day he had been captured, it had been raining. But that was then. Now they were inside with a soft bed, and a steaming hot bath in the next room. Naruto was content. As long as he didn't think about the fact that at best he had a little more than a day before they arrived in Konoha, and he had to face his old friends. And tell them why he hadn't come back. The opposition against allowing the Akatsuki representatives to enter Konoha was loud and fierce. Despite the necessity of the alliance, Tsunade couldn't help on some level agreeing with them. Though they had started with only 9 members, in the 6 years since its founding the Akatsuki had grown to such proportions that the numbers of its ninja rivaled that of the smaller shinobi villages, and every single one of the Akatsuki was jounin or better. Almost all of the most powerful missing nin had long since joined the Akatsuki out of sheer necessity, and fear of its strongest shinobi. They were a threat that far exceeded that of any other enemy, even Orochimaru's Sound Village, and no one could see a reason for them to want to ally with the Leaf. So it had to be a trap. At least that's how the more paranoid Konoha ninja saw it. They are sending 4 shinobi to hammer out the truce. That number is ridiculous, especially taking into consideration that among them number Uchiha Itachi and Gaara of the Sand. Most of the shinobi in the room couldn't help but glance at 2 young ninjas speaking quietly in the corner. Kankuro and Temari were the only survivors of the slaughter of Sand Village, all of the others killed at the hands of Gaara mere days before he joined the Akatsuki 2 years ago. No one knew why, but it was rumored the Akatsuki had used it as an entrance exam, though this was little more than hearsay. Kankuro and Temari had stumbled into the Leaf a few weeks after the attack, ashen-faced and exhausted. Tsunade had taken them in. She too knew the pain of loss, but many of the Leaf suspected Kankuro and Temari to be spies for the Akatsuki. Why else would they be the only ones spared? These suspicions were heightened by the knowledge that Kankuro and Temari were the siblings of the killer. Privately, Tsunade thought Gaara had spared his brother and sister out of some lingering sibling affection and had no ulterior motives, but despite her considerable pull as Hokage, it had taken the support of Jiraiya and Kakashi for the villagers to finally accept the two, though both Kankuro and Temari insisted on keeping their sand forehead protectors. They had since made jounin, but spoke rarely and worked with no one but each other. Despite Tsunade's concern, neither of them had worked through their grief. The Sannin wasn't sure it was their village they mourned for. Counselor, your advice is appreciated, but you're being ridiculous. The Akatsuki consists of shinobi, and only shinobi. They do not have diplomats to send us. They assigned some of their strongest members to the task as a sign they are taking us seriously. Sending the murderer of the Uchiha clan is a deliberate attempt to mock us. We should. This discussion is over, Counselor Yamamoto. They are arriving tomorrow. This has already been decided. We are merely convened here to determine how to best deal with the Akatsuki, not to decide whether to accept their being here in the village. Tsunade's tone was cool, and brooked no argument. Yamamoto still tried. But, Counselor, you know as well as I do that we need this alliance. Constant fighting with the mist and cloud on the eastern border have significantly weakened us, and though they have not attacked us in some time, the last battle we had with the Sound killed off of many of our strongest fighters. The Sand were our strongest allies and they can't help us now. The Stone have isolated themselves, and the smaller villages have to take care of their own people. If we do not ally with the Akatsuki, within a decade the Leaf will collapse. A sullen silence fell over the assembly, which was soon broken by Kakashi walking in, late as usual. So, what did I miss? Tsunade glared at the copy ninja, but after so many years even she accepted that nothing short of war could force Kakashi to be on time. Just the usual bickering after everything has already been agreed upon. By the way, Hokage-sama, I just got some information. The Akatsuki representatives are making better time than expected. They'll be here by tonight. Tsunade felt her eyes widen. What? We aren't ready. All of the daimyos aren't here yet, and where did you get this information? Kakashi shrugged. One of the ANBU scouts spotted them about 50 miles away about half an hour ago and sent a messenger pigeon. He dug a scroll out of his pocket. He also gave some specifics too about the shinobi they sent. As expected, 2 of the shinobi are Uchiha Itachi and Gaara of the Sand. One of the others in Hashigaki Kisame, Uchiha Itachi's partner, and a mist renegade. The last was unidentified, and his lack of a forehead protector means we have no idea what village he is from. The ANBU wasn't able to get close enough to get any defining characteristics except the fact that the last representative has blonde hair tied back in a short horsetail. He wore an Akatsuki cloak, but that tells us nothing but what we already know. Tsunade nodded sharply and turned to Shizen. Are their rooms ready? Her assistant nodded. The Hokage sighed, running a hand through her hair. Well, we better get started. Move out, people. As the shinobi filed out of the room, Kakashi noticed Sasuke brooding in a corner. At age 16, the heir to the Uchiha clan had achieved the 3rd pinwheel of the Sharingan, but had not yet managed to use the main Sharingan, which constantly rankled the young man, as he knew that he was still far below his brother in skill. Sasuke, you know you cannot fight Itachi while he is here under a flag of truce. The hands crossed across the young prodigy's chest momentarily clenched into fists, but he nodded tightly. Kakashi nodded back, and turned to leave. He wasn't surprised to see Sakura standing hesitantly by the door. Though she had long given up on Sasuke as a love interest and instead had started to return the taijutsu specialist Rock Lee's affections, she still cared for the Uchiha greatly. Is he? He'll be fine. It's just hard for him to deal with the fact that if the alliance comes through, he'll never get the chance to fight Itachi again. It's difficult to give up on a goal you've had for half your life, but Sasuke is strong. And he has too many ties to the Leaf to abandon the village for vengeance. Sakura nodded, only looking slightly reassured. Kakashi smiled at her. She had grown up to be a fine young woman, becoming a chunin without the help of her teammates, Sasuke being distant and Naruto being… well, that was still hard to think about. Her lack of great stamina had moved her to specialize in genjutsu, illusion techniques, as her ability to see through them was her only true standout characteristic. All in all, she had far progressed beyond Kakashi's expectations, and he fully expected her to be one of the best candidates at next year's Jounin exams. Trust me, Sakura. He will not leave us. They both glanced at the shinobi in question, who was gazing out the window, a contemplative look on his face. Sakura sighed. I hope you're right, Kakashi-sensei. Brother, what are you going to do? Kankuro glanced at his sister, standing beside him on the top of a small hill to the south of Leaf Village. Why would you think I was going to do anything? Gaara is coming. You think I hold the Suna village against him? Don't you? The puppeteer shook his head. The gods know, I used to. But I've had 2 years to think about it, Temari. And I can't help but think that it wasn't entirely undeserved. The villagers. Seeing how they treated Gaara, remembering how we used to treat him. Gaara wasn't raised with anything resembling morals, or a conscience. It may have been horrible, but there wasn't any reason for him not to do it. They treated him like a monster. Yeah, and they didn't treat us much better. I remember thinking that I was wrong about Gaara getting better after we attempted to invade Konoha, but I think he actually did get better. Why else would he leave us alive? Temari sighed. I kind of agree with you, Kankuro, but don't go around talking about your forgiveness of our baby brother. The Sand were the Leaf's most powerful allies. Your view wouldn't be appreciated. Of course not. I'm not an idiot, Temari. That could be successfully argued to the contrary. That earned a dirty look from the younger Sannin. The fan wielder ignored it. But really, what are you going to do? It kind of depends on Gaara. A grin? Doesn't it always? Yeah. Let's go get some miso. I'm starving. Are we there yet? No. Now? Kid, shut up before I shove something unpleasant in an unfortunate place. Naruto huffed, but he did stop. The closer they got to Konoha, the more nervous he became. He had already killed 3 squirrels and a large pigeon when their movement on the edge of his peripheral vision had kick-started his survival training, and he had thrown kunai on instinct. This had provided them lunch but gave Naruto no peace of mind. He had tried mulling over the problem, but his brooding skills had always been subpar and they weren't getting any better. So instead he irritated the others. This proved rather difficult, as Gaara and Itachi ignored him and Kisame only tolerated the annoyance for a few minutes before quickly putting an end to it. He had little more than 6 hours before they arrived at Leaf Village. Damn it, he wasn't ready for this. He had thought he had left his miserable life at Konoha behind. Not completely miserable. A little voice at the back of his head reminded him, but Naruto brushed that aside. A few months of happiness didn't make up for years of pain and cruelty, of being hurt and taunted, treated as something less than human. Even after 4 years, even slightly wary looks set him off, reminding him of the pain of being despised, or at best forgotten. Which is why in the end, after the seal had been removed and he could move freely, he had stayed. It was probably sad that he could only find acceptance in a group full of freaks and merciless killers, but he would take it where he could get it. The pain of loneliness was vastly underestimated. To quote something Gaara had once told him, it is the inner wounds that hurt the most. And Naruto knew it to be true. Sometimes he wondered why Itachi had killed the Uchiha clan. Though he lacked compassion, Naruto had never seen the Sharingan wielder kill anyone unless it was completely necessary. Well, except for the boarders at the inn. And that one Cloud Shinobi 2 weeks ago, but he had deserved it. When you're stupid enough to try and flirt with Itachi, from then on anything that happens can easily be attributed to Darwin. Okay, there was also the village girl who wouldn't stop bothering them, and it wasn't like Itachi had actually killed her, he had just used some genjutsu and the cliff had just happened to be there. Well, there was also that cloth merchant. And the fisherman. Wait, that had been Kisame. What had he been thinking about again? Oh yeah, the murder of the Uchiha clan. Maybe there was no good reason. Certainly there wasn't one that could satisfy Sasuke. Not that it mattered. After this, Naruto vowed he would never return to Konoha. Besides, the ramen there sucked. Naruto. The former Leaf Nin looked up, startled to see that he'd fallen far behind the others. Gaara was waiting for him. You're nervous. So? Temari and Kankuro are also in Leaf Village. Silence. And? I do not know how they will react to seeing me. Naruto couldn't help but smile. Awkward though the attempt was, Gaara's efforts to reassure him were appreciated. Well, I guess we'll just have to face their disgust and fear together then. Yes. Gods, Gaara was such a maladjusted freak. No wonder they were partners, besides both being demon-possessed and short. Kisame and Itachi were still walking. Damn it, don't those two ever wait. Naruto ran to catch up. Stalling wouldn't make the anticipation any better. If he had to face them, better sooner than later. And then he could go back to his life of difficult missions, ridiculously strong coffee, and going out for drinks with people he had formerly tried his darndest to kill. Right now, it absolutely sounded wonderful. On occasion, Naruto liked to reflect back on his first mission with Itachi and Kisame. Gaara had not yet joined the Akatsuki, and he had still had that stupid seal which stopped him from either summoning the Kyuubi's power or going within 2 days' walking distance of Konoha. It had sucked. Majorly. He had been captured barely a week before, had fully expected to have the Kyuubi extracted from him, and then killed or something else done to him equally evil and nefarious. Instead, the mysterious, shadowy leader of the Akatsuki had taken one look at him and proclaimed he didn't eat enough. It was strangely disconcerting to realize that the leader of one of the most feared shinobi syndicates in the world was a woman. Naruto had never been consciously sexist. It just so happened that the most powerful ninja he knew were all men. Then there was Hirayama Reiko, a missing nin from the Stone Country, who had grown bored with the isolationist policy of her village and left as soon as she achieved the rank of Jounin, to seek out jutsu wherever she could find them. Specializing in ninjutsu, she still had the ability to punch so hard that it was said in a fit of anger she once split a mountain in two. Despite all this, Reiko was not the strongest member of the Akatsuki. Itachi for one could defeat her. She just happened to have the biggest shinobi information network in the world, garnered from her extensive travels. And it was information that the Akatsuki most desired. The knowledge of where to find the strongest opponents, the best clients, and the strongest jutsus. The vote was unanimous when it came to choosing who would lead the Red Moon. On his first encounter with her, Naruto knew none of this. After being dragged for days away from the only home he had ever known, he hadn't been ready for a woman in her 50s that could have been 20 years younger, but acted like his grandmother. Or how he had always imagined a grandmother would act like. She had promptly snapped the chakra cuffs that held him and carried him off to town, completely ignoring Kisame and Itachi, who were still standing where they had since they first presented their prisoner to her. Naruto complained the entire way and tried to get her to let go of him, but her grip was stronger than he expected. He stopped resisting when they got to the ramen stand and she told the owner she would pay for whatever the kid could manage to stuff his face with. Hirayama Reiko earned Naruto's eternal loyalty from then on out. So did the ramen stand, which was far better than Naruto was used to. While he ate, Reiko explained the situation to him. I've had Itachi-kun. Itachi had never struck Naruto as someone anyone could address in such a familiar manner, and Kisame-kun, if anything, that sounded even weirder, track you for some time, Naruto-chan. While the chan was somewhat insulting, and a bit too friendly for someone that despite her feeding him had ordered him kidnapped, Naruto's mouth was too full of ramen for him to respond. While it seems the Sannin has done a decent job teaching you to harness the power of the Kyuubi, he lacks a true understanding of what to do with you. You have not yet entered puberty, Naruto-chan, and it is then your power will start to bloom. You are not prepared for it. Naruto swallowed enough to pose a question. It probably should have surprised him that yet another person knew about the demon possessing him, but when a whole village knows about it, even a ninja village, other people are bound to find out. What's that got to do with having Red Ice and Sharkface kidnap me? Reiko laughed. Well, I wouldn't exactly call it a kidnapping, Naruto-chan, but you deserve an explanation. The seal the fourth Hokage put on you was strong, but meant to be purely temporary. Your power until very recently has never been addressed. And right now you only have nominal control of the Kyuubi. In fact, and at this the Akatsuki leader's face grew suddenly solemn, you really have no control over him at all. You simply bargain with him when you need him most. Right now you hold the key to his cell, Naruto-chan, but as you grow older, his prison will weaken, and he will eventually break out. If that happens, you will seek to exist. Naruto choked on his lunch. What? At least that is what he meant to say. It came out rather more mangled than that, but seemed to get the basic idea across. Keep in mind, Naruto-chan, you are the vessel for the Kyuubi. If you grow weaker than the one possessing you, he will overpower you, and he is strong enough that he doesn't need to imprison you. He could destroy you entirely. And that's where I come in. I've traveled around quite a bit. I've seen a lot more than most people, including demons. And half-demon hybrids. Only a handful of possessed humans such as yourself, but a few have managed to survive their adolescence, and I know how they did it. Naruto-chan, you are strong, but the Kyuubi is one of the most powerful demons in the world. Certainly the most powerful to ever possess a human. Without help, expert help, you will not make it past 20. Naruto was having trouble swallowing. The ramen didn't look so tasty anymore, though he hadn't eaten a full meal in almost 3 days. Why would you help me? Reiko's eyes softened. You remind me of my little brother. Really? Actually, no, you don't. I was lying. The former Stonin grinned. You're way cuter than he was. Naruto felt awkward. What do you say to something like that? I'm sorry. So am I. What happened to him? He grew up, got married, and stopped maintaining his physique. Now he looks older than I do and weighs more than a well-fed pig. Reiko sighed. Nothing angers me more than people squandering what the gods gave them. Or in your case, what the fourth Hokage gave you. I hate to see talent wasted, Naruto-chan. Even to Naruto, hardly the most worldly of shinobi, this seemed like kind of a weak reason to send 2 S-class criminals to kidnap him, but before he could voice his suspicions, Reiko interrupted. Finished already, Naruto-chan? We had better get back to headquarters. It irritates Itachi-kun when I leave him hanging like that. And you need some new clothes. Those look a bit frayed. Naruto couldn't help but grip his orange jacket closer to himself. It was a bit of a sore point with him when people criticized what he wore. It wasn't like he had a lot of money to buy new stuff when the old stuff got a bit worn. Even so, she was offering to get him new clothes. Itachi and Kisame were still standing in the same place. Naruto checked the wall clock. They hadn't moved in over half an hour. Creepy. Itachi-kun, Kisame-kun, what are you two still doing here? Your pay is in your accounts, the job is over. You delivered Naruto-chan to me safely. If I need you for anything, I'll be sure to send for you, okay? Okay. Throughout her chatter, Reiko somehow got the 2 insanely powerful missing nin through and out the door. She closed the huge double doors with a satisfied grin, and turned back to Naruto. Now where were we? Outside, Kisame sighed wearily, and turned to Itachi. Don't you just hate it when she does that? Yes. If only we could figure out how she manages to. Kisame, some things are beyond the understanding of normal people. I've been studying her techniques for years, and still can't comprehend her strategy. But your Sharingan. Oh. You up for some lunch, Itachi-san? Pork dumplings. Ikaita's best then. Alright. If Naruto could figure out what genjutsu Reiko-sama used to convince him that going to the Cloud Country with 2 convicted killers was a good idea, he could become Hokage in a week flat. 4 days after first arriving in the small village north of Konoha, feeling warm, safe, and full for perhaps the first time in his life, Reiko had caught him off guard when she asked him if he minded going on a little trip to pick something up for her. Half asleep, he hadn't thought twice about agreeing to help, if only to pay back a little of the debt he felt he owed her after she bought him new clothes, gave him a big enough allowance that he could buy all the ramen he could eat, and taught him a few meditation techniques that helped still the bad dreams he had been having lately. To say the least, he had been rather unpleasantly surprised to find out that the little errand was in fact a journey that round trip would take 2 weeks, not counting the time he would have to spend in Kumo stealing what happened to be 2 summoning scrolls belonging to one of the most powerful daimyos in the Cloud Country, and Kisame and Itachi were coming with him. Or to be more precise, Kisame and Itachi were going, and he was tagging along because Reiko found it amusing. No one else could see the humor in it. Itachi didn't even seem to notice he was there most of the time. Kisame was slightly more friendly, but only in comparison. Like how torture was nice in comparison to being choked to death. Things had gotten strange when they arrived in Kumo. Kisame and Itachi didn't wear their cloaks and forehead protectors in the name of remaining inconspicuous, though Naruto wondered why they hadn't thought to do that while they were in Konoha. Or maybe they had wanted to be noticed there. Either way, this had created a bit of a conflict between Kisame and Naruto about a day before they arrived in the village where the daimyo resided. Brat, if you weren't completely thick-skulled, you would know that Kumo is the enemy of Konoha. They don't like leaf nins here. If you wear your Hittite headband, every shinobi within 100 miles will be aiming for the shiny leaf on your forehead. Naruto gripped his forehead protector tightly in both hands. He glared at the missing nin. I worked years for this. Iruka-sensei gave it to me. I'm not going to give it up just because Kisame sighed in agitation. Brat, I'm not telling you to throw it away. Just hide it in your bag or something. Naruto blinked. Oh. Muttering something under his breath about shrimpy foxtail brats, Kisame hefted his gigantic sharkskin sword over one shoulder and walked over to where Itachi was napping under a tree, having fallen asleep from boredom during all the arguing. The daimyo hired ninja. Though there were more than a few jounin, this ordinarily wouldn't have been a problem except that Reiko-sama gave explicit orders that there was to be no indication that the Akatsuki were involved, which complicated things quite a bit, as Itachi and Kisame were quite well known, even this far out. Naruto wasn't. They had less than a month before the scrolls were to be formally presented to the Raikage, and then they would be inaccessible short of a full-out war, so they had a month to get Naruto competent enough to sneak past jounin-level shinobi, steal from the daimyo's personal vault, and sneak back out again without being seen. As far as Naruto could tell, it was an impossible task. Good thing Itachi and Kisame knew how to do diversions, or even training for a month with almost no sleep on genjutsu he had previously thought way out of his league wouldn't have been enough. Even with people you don't like, forced into adverse conditions for long periods of time will make you bond with the weirdest people. Maybe it was Stockholm Syndrome, but by the time it was over, going back to Konoha didn't sound like as good of an idea as it used to. And it was kind of oddly comforting to be thought of as so minor a threat that Brat became his new nickname, when he came from a village that regarded him as a terrible danger. Being underrated is as underestimated as being lonely. It was almost worth it to lose his hearing for a week. Naruto hadn't thought the bomb's explosions would be so loud. Well, that's what he got for not packing earplugs like Itachi had suggested. We're here. Naruto looked up, no longer immersed in the past. What, already? No, yesterday. Gods, kid, your head has been in the clouds lately. It was a stupid pun, and Kisame hadn't even been aware of making it, but Naruto smiled anyway. He could see Konoha now, just a few miles away. Naruto knew he probably wouldn't have much to smile about for a while. It was kind of funny, though more in a funny ironic than a funny haha sort of way. Technically, all Akatsuki members were allowed to refuse missions, but when Reiko-sama wanted something, she tended to get it. Hirayama Reiko possessed no ocular ninjutsu to speak of, but even Itachi had to be at the top of his game if he wanted to resist her manipulations. And she had planned the announcement of this mission carefully. All four of them had been somewhat tired from their last mission, and they all knew that unless they were fresh and pulling for a fight, arguing would be a waste of time, even though Reiko's scheming had done the impossible and moved Itachi to use his Sharingan in anger. One of these days, someone is going to find Reiko-sama's body in the bottom of ditch where one of us stuffed her to get her to shut up, thought Naruto, though didn't really believe it. Besides Reiko-sama, no one but Itachi could possibly hold an organization full of such powerful and independent shinobi together, and Itachi lacked the interest to command. So Reiko would live a while longer. Probably. Unless Kisame wasn't around next time Itachi lost his temper. Wouldn't that be a show to watch? Maybe he could sell tickets. Nah. Kisame would kill me. Of course, what Kisame didn't know wouldn't hurt him. This rather pleasing fantasy kept him occupied until they arrived at the enormous stone wall that was the barrier between Konoha village and the rest of the world. Somehow it looked a lot more formidable, now that Naruto was on the outside, looking in. The guards seemed to have received a similar upgrade. They surveyed the Akatsuki members, expressions grim, and overall looked a lot more dangerous than Naruto remembered them to be. Naruto couldn't help but swallow as their gazes swept over him. Itachi, Kisame, and Gaara didn't seem nearly so affected. Itachi and Gaara, if anything, looked bored, and Kisame just pulled out that shark grin of his that he kept in storage whenever they weren't on missions. He had tried to teach it to Naruto once, but Naruto had always ended up looking demented rather than dangerous with some insanity mixed in for variety. So he stuck with solemn, which worked well enough most of the time. It served its intended purpose. The Konoha Jounin guards barely gave him a passing glance, instead concentrating on Gaara and Itachi. Finally, one spoke up. You are the Akatsuki representatives? Itachi nodded. Very well. Come with us, please. Naruto hadn't honestly expected the guards at the gate to recognize him. People in Konoha tended to know him by reputation, not on sight, and he had met very few of the Jounin that regularly patrolled the borders. Inside the village was another matter. Every time someone met his eyes, Naruto flinched. And since everyone was looking at them, it could hardly be avoided. Most of the gazes were hostile. Angry. There were a lot of low voices, whispering in the crowd. No one stared at them for long. Just furtive glances, as if they didn't want to be caught looking. And still no one recognized him. He kept expecting to see a familiar face, like the ramen shop owner, or the old lady who lived next door. But if they were among the other villagers, Naruto didn't see them. There were some curious gazes who lingered upon him, perhaps wondering who he was, but as with the Jounin guards, most of the focus was on Gaara and Itachi. Especially Itachi. This was ridiculous. They had been walking through the village for a good 20 minutes. The head of the procession was almost to the Hokage's tower. And he still hadn't seen anyone he knew. Did he really know so few people? Naruto hadn't thought so, but on reflection his scope of acquaintances was rather narrow, since most people had tended to avoid him. The mutterings were growing louder. The potential for violence thickened in the evening air, but before it reached its peak, they arrived. Naruto wondered if there was a restroom handy he could throw up in. His nerves were killing him. Who was the Hokage? He really should know this. Hadn't he and Jiraiya been going somewhere to get the new one when Itachi and Kisame had finally gotten a hold of him? Had Jiraiya ever given him a name? Naruto was honest enough with himself that he knew he might not be remembering it if Jiraiya had revealed the name to him, but he also knew the old pervert had an annoying habit of never telling anyone anything if he could possibly help it. Either way, it was no good to blame Jiraiya. It had been 4 years, and he should have learned the Hokage's name at some point along the way. The Hokage's tower was looking bigger, too, even as they entered it, and left the angry mob behind. There was no sound as they walked through the halls. Shinobi always moved silently. To do otherwise was to die, and old habits didn't fade even in the relative sanctity of their home village. And of course the Akatsuki had no reason to relax. When they entered the main hall, Naruto finally realized why he hadn't seen any familiar faces outside. Almost everyone he knew was here. Some of the faces were almost unrecognizable. Time and battle had altered many, but there was Kiba, hair even more tousled than in his childhood, leaning against the left wall, a fully grown Akamaru lying at his feet. Shikamaru, missing one arm and considerably taller, sat on one of the lower steps leading up to the Hokage's chair. He could sense Niji somewhere in the room, but the Hyuga wasn't visible, most likely hidden behind one of the Anbu masks. The leaders of all the major clans were there. Aburame, Inuzuka, Hyuga, but no Uchiha. No Sasuke. No Sakura, for that matter. As far as Naruto could tell, Jiraiya wasn't there either, though Kakashi stood partially concealed in the far right corner of the room, eyes closed but chakra awareness swirling around him. The Hokage was a woman. Naruto remembered being told that much by Jiraiya, but he was startled by how young she looked. Though he knew from Reiko-sama how deceptive appearances could be, this blonde, voluptuous woman didn't seem to be more than a few years out of her teens. Mid-20s at most. Naruto waited, as they walked down the path that led to where the Hokage presided over the hall. He waited as the Hokage, who introduced herself as Tsunade, welcomed the Akatsuki delegation to Konoha. He waited, as Itachi thanked her for allowing them to come, in the same cold, polite voice he used for everything, be it asking for someone to pass the wasabi, or telling an enemy shinobi how, exactly, they were going to make him talk. Naruto waited. But there was nothing. What was wrong with these people? They were shinobi, weren't they? Shinobi were supposed to notice things. Like him. Like how he was standing right there, in the front of the room, face uncovered, and they still paid no more attention to him than they did to, say, the wall. All eyes were turned towards Itachi. Naruto was really getting sick of being ignored in favor of Uchihas, though Itachi was less annoying about it than Sasuke had been. Did he really look that different? Sure, his hair was longer, and he had grown some, and his pupils may have slitted a little from partially bonding with the Kyuubi. Reiko-sama told him that tended to happen when a demon's power was used enough, but he was still blonde, short, and had the facial markings that, if anything, had grown more obvious over time. So what if he was technically dead? From the accounts of the Anbu who had witnessed the third Hokage's death, they had recognized the first and second right off, and those two had kicked the bucket, 20, 30 years ago. Was he so unimportant? Why was he getting upset about this? If he could get through the negotiations with no one recognizing him, he would get off scot-free. Too bad Naruto had never been the luckiest of shinobi. He was usually happy to get through a day without running into something, and today the gods of fortune had decided it would be more fun for them if they screwed Naruto over. As Tsunade moved on to her opening statement, inquiring as to the Akatsuki's intentions, there was a gasp in the audience. All eyes turned to the source of the sound, most of them accusing. Who was this incredibly rude person who interrupted the Hokage at a vital step in the negotiations? Naruto groaned. He hadn't taken into account Hyuga Hinata. Of all the people in Konoha, barring Jiraiya, who wasn't there, Hinata was the person who had the most reason to remember Naruto. While Jiraiya was plagued with continual guilt over his failure to protect his idiot apprentice, Naruto had promised Hinata a date, and then rescheduled when Jiraiya dragged him along on the quest to retrieve Tsunade. A result of forces outside of Naruto's control had left Hinata with a nice dress and dinner reservations but no one to eat the dinner with. In the end, she had brought Kiba, and forever regretted it, as he had insisted on bringing Akamaru, who wasn't the most well-behaved of dogs. It didn't help that Kiba was also not the most well-mannered of humans. Being stood up by Naruto, her crush, had made the fox-possessed genin a permanent fixture in Hinata's mind. Hinata hardly blamed Naruto for not showing up, but his subsequent death after she had finally maneuvered her way into Naruto's affections enough that he asked her out, gave her a feeling of perpetual guilt almost as strong as Jiraiya's, as she believed fate had killed her true love so they would never be together. And Hinata wasn't nearly as good as the Sennin at shaking such things off. Regardless of Hinata's near obsession with the memory of Naruto, it had taken the Hyuga heir a few minutes to recognize her former crush, mostly because she had in her head a very clear picture of what Naruto looked like, and he no longer matched it. It was the eyes, still that lake clear blue she had found so beautiful, that finally juxtaposed her childhood fantasy over the imposing ninja that stood before her. She almost spoke up. Almost. The glares of the crowd stilled the words before they managed to form in her mouth. Despite her attempts to self-actualize over the years, Hinata still wasn't what you would call self-assured. Expectations, large amounts of people, big challenges, all of these made her panic and freeze up as surely as any ice jutsu. The glares quieted her. And so, she said nothing. But she was a Hyuga, so as most of the eyes turned back to the Hokage when Tsunade continued her speech, Hinata's eyes stayed on Naruto, who similarly was still staring at her. And the Hyuga clan were the masters of an even more precise form of ocular ninjutsu than the famed Uchiha's. Hinata's eyes said what her tongue could not. Naruto-kun, after this is over, we are going to have a talk. You have a lot of explaining to do. Hinata's eyes always were the most expressive part of her. That was the way of the Hyuga clan. Fate, who in some way had to be related to the gods of fortune, didn't seem to like Naruto much more than they did. The rest of the meeting took less than half an hour, as it was getting late and both parties, Itachi and Tsunade, in this case, thought it would be a better idea to continue the proceedings in the morning. Naruto couldn't help but be perversely glad that a complement of A and Bu guided him and Gaara to the room they were being lent for the duration of the negotiations. With guards outside, there was no way Hinata could get to him. And he could hardly seek her out, seeing as leaving the room would probably be a violation of the current temporary truce. They were told that a hot springs was available if they wanted to use it. Naruto, who quite frankly wanted nothing more than to collapse on the bed and sleep for a few days, was about to refuse when Gaara preempted him and accepted the offer. Naruto stared askance at his partner. Gaara never talked if he could avoid it. As Gaara followed the Anbu, he wordlessly pressed a slip of paper into the blonde shinobi's hand. Hot springs. Oh. Huh. Itachi and Kisame were already there when they arrived. Both looked far too relaxed than the situation called for. Itachi seemed to be half asleep, submerged in the water up to his chin, and Kisame was humming tunelessly as he read a scroll by the side of the pool. Naruto called out a greeting as he and Gaara approached, but only Kisame bothered to look up. Naruto and Gaara settled into the water, Naruto with a content sigh. He had forgotten how nice the hot springs felt. He hadn't been in one for years. So, why'd you ask us to come here? Kisame held up the scroll in one hand. Reiko-sama sent us a message. Naruto glanced at the door that led to the changing room. Kisame snorted. Kid, if you'd put that training we gave you to work once in a while, maybe you'd notice we already have the area sealed. No one's going to hear us. Just make sure not to move your lips too much. The former Miss Nin tossed a scroll to Naruto. Opening the scroll, Naruto suddenly wished he hadn't slept through those tutoring sessions Reiko had put him through on code. Kisame's sigh was an eerie mirror of Irika's, which sent an unexpected wave of nostalgia through the fox-possessed shinobi, and a longing for his former sensei. Irika, the first person to be kind to him, the first to see him as something other than a vessel for a demon. Naruto realized with a pang that he didn't even know if Irika was still alive. He hadn't seen the Chunin at the meeting. He was abruptly snapped out of his musings when something hit him on the side of the head with bruising force. Naruto watched, half-stunned by the blow, as the bar of soap landed a few feet away and sank to the bottom of the pool. Kisame glared at him. Brat, ever since we left headquarters your eyes have been glazed over. Has Tsukiyoki been selling you sedatives again? Naruto's eyes widened. Kisame hated Tsukiyoki, and had practically killed Naruto when he had found out who the former Leaf Nin had been going to for his occasional bouts of insomnia. No. Then what's the problem? Why did we have to come here? Another sigh. Brat, did you sleep through that meeting too? I know why we're here. I just don't know why we're here. Does it really matter? And how should I know anyway? Only insanely Machiavellian people even know what Reiko-sama talking about half the time, much less what she's thinking. Anyway, Reiko-sama's message just tells us the specifics of what we're trying to get out of this. Cease of hostilities, fair trade agreements, that sort of thing. Nothing you need to worry about. Then why did you? Itachi spoke without opening his eyes. Go talk to the Hyuga. You noticed? It will be much worse for the Akatsuki if you avoid her, and she decides to tell someone. If she becomes angry with you, she could prejudice the Leaf Council against us. Talking to Hinata was the last thing Naruto wanted to do. Itachi, how am I supposed to find her? We're surrounded by guards. Brat, you're a ninja. Figure it out. One Kage Bunshin and some creative use of genjutsu got him out of the pool house without the ANBU noticing, but sneaking through the vents had negated all the cleanliness of the hot springs. It had taken him 3 false turns to find his room and change into some clothes. Finding Hinata was going to be impossible. The village was huge, he was supposed to be in the spring, and going to her family's estate would be suicide. Naruto was wondering how he was going to explain all this to Itachi's satisfaction when he opened the door and almost ran into Hinata. They stared at each other for several moments. It was Naruto who broke the stalemate. Hi. Hello? Her voice was quiet. So, you wanted to talk? She nodded, and gestured for him to follow her. They walked silently through back corridors, meeting no one, and stopped at a balcony facing away from Konoha village, towards the forest. The moon was out. It was undeniably beautiful. Naruto's heart twinged. He had missed the woods. The Akatsuki headquarters were stationed in a port town, mountains on 2 sides, desert to the south. Why did you leave us, Naruto-kun? Kisame was right. If the very sound of Hinata's voice made him jump, he had been too distracted lately. Hinata-chan, I didn't exactly have a choice. Kisame and Itachi kidnapped me, and Kisame's Samahata prevented me from using any jutsu, so. Then why did you stay away? Geez, Hinata was sure into the difficult questions tonight. Gods, the forest was amazing. So green. I guess. But it hid a lot of things. Covered a lot. Nothing was out in the open, which made Naruto feel even more exposed. Like people could see things he couldn't. I was tired, Hinata-chan. You don't like hiding, Naruto-kun? Her eyes closed. I can understand that. I've been trying for a long time to become something I'm not. And it was hard for you, especially. You didn't know why you were supposed to keep hidden, away from the eyes of other people. So you hid everything. And they still hated you. I didn't know why. Now she met Naruto's eyes. The lack of pupils was a distinguishing trait of the Hyuga line. It made them hard to read. Hinata had always tried to get around this by using facial expressions as much as possible, but still, you could never really tell what she was thinking. Naruto-kun, do you hide now? Naruto blinked, and thought about it. Tried to remember a time in the past 4 years when he hidden how he truly felt. And couldn't. At the beginning, this was more of a case of not caring what anyone thought enough to bother acting all cheerful most of the time. Later, it was because Itachi would tell Naruto that he wasn't very good at pretending to be happy, and the false smiles were starting to annoy him. So he stopped, and was surprised when no one treated him differently. At least no one that mattered. Naruto had actually had more close friends in Konoha than he had in the Akatsuki, and even then, members of the Red Moon tended to be so good at disguising what they were thinking that friendships were sort of tenuous. Naruto was sort of sure that Reiko-sama liked him. And he knew from the volume Kisame tended to yell at him with when Naruto did something abysmally stupid that the former Miss Nin at least cared enough that he didn't want Naruto to die. Itachi was an emotional black hole. And Gaara. Partnerships in the Akatsuki were odd, to say the least. In Konoha, you were expected to become close with your teammates, if only to increase efficiency on missions, but the Akatsuki took it to a whole other level. It had been an observation of Naruto's, one that took him a few years. He wasn't the fastest ninja on the uptake, that partners who had been together for a while never spoke to each other. Itachi and Kisame, for example, Naruto had never seen say anything to each other outside of combat situations. At first, he thought this was because Itachi was just incredibly antisocial, but then Naruto noticed that both of them moved like they were talking. Kisame would get up and get something, then hand it to Itachi, all in silence. Itachi would wordlessly hand Kisame condiments while they were eating. It was like they were psychically linked. This feeling was intensified when they would exchange looks, and whole conversations seemed to pass between them. And it wasn't limited to them. Naruto had known Akatsuki who committed suicide after their partner died in battle. Naruto wasn't there yet with Gaara, but he had begun to read the smallest changes in Gaara's expressions, could tell by a shift of the eyes whether Gaara was angry, or as close as he ever got to happy. And they didn't talk as much as they used to, Or at least Naruto didn't. Gaara hadn't spoken much to begin with. Naruto was reasonably sure that he wouldn't kill himself if someone had an amazing stroke of luck and managed to get through all of Gaara's defenses. But he remembered one mission when he and Gaara had been separated. It had felt like he was missing a limb, and even with the Kyuubi-enhanced senses, he couldn't help but feel half-blind. Naruto had incurred more than one injury on that assignment. He had forgotten how to watch his back. He had forgotten how to work alone. He had forgotten what it was like to be alone. He was accepted in the Akatsuki. People said hello to him in the hall. He got invited to games of shogi and parties. He even dated once in a while. He was still a freak, but out for everyone to see. A freak among other freaks. He wasn't strange in the Red Moon. Considering the sheer talent most of the members possessed, very few of them were entirely human. He was no longer a stranger to himself, and he felt comfortable showing that to others. Even if outsiders tended to regard him with fear, he was treated as normal among his comrades. Nothing special, even if he did have Reiko-sama's favor. Naruto prized that beyond anything. No. Hinata smiled, but her eyes were still blank. If you're happy there, Naruto-kun, then it would be selfish of me to try and make you come back. She turned around and left. Naruto didn't hear her last words. Just stay happy, okay? Don't fake it anymore. If Hinata wanted to be heard once in a while, she really should speak up. Naruto watched the moon bathe the trees in an unearthly light for a while, then abruptly remembered he wasn't really supposed to be there. Using the vents really was a pain in the ass. Didn't anyone ever clean those things? It was a wise move though, considering that the ANBU guards were again at the door, and Gaara was back inside their room. The doppelganger was with him, though it dissipated as soon as Naruto dropped into its view. Sorry I'm late. Did I miss anything? Back on the balcony, the shadows shifted and grew. The darkness had eyes, and abruptly a body, as Shikamaru stepped out of the gloom. Faye. He hated being right all the time. Once in a while, it would be nice to be wrong. Like about this. Sometimes he wondered about people. Naruto looked barely different at all, yet his own sensei didn't recognize him. And he was Akatsuki. Considering how powerful Naruto was, that might be a problem. Or not, seeing as Naruto's abilities were overshadowed by his sheer thoughtlessness and occasional idiocy. Dangerous to his enemies Naruto may be, but from what he had heard, Naruto wasn't a danger to them. Shikamaru wondered if it would be worth the bother to tell the Hokage about this. You're late. Having done this for several years, much of what they did had become habitual. Kakashi would wander in an hour or so after their meeting was scheduled, Tsunade would scold him, Kakashi would shrug, Tsunade would glare for several minutes, sigh, and accept, again. That as with many things concerning Kakashi, criticism didn't affect the copy ninja at all. After several moments, in which Kakashi got himself situated on the couch Tsunade usually slept on when exhaustion made going back to her room implausible, in a position that made him resemble nothing more than a very spoiled cat, they got started. So? Kakashi shrugged. Tsunade rubbed her temples. Of all her subordinates, Kakashi gave her the most tension headaches. She could feel a migraine coming on. I require a little more than that. What did you think of them? I didn't think anything. At that, Tsunade's already tenuous hold on her temper frayed, and snapped. She remembered herself enough to hold back a little of her power. As skilled as Kakashi was, he was not one of the few who could survive one of her punches when she was really worked up. Still, slamming him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster, making the usually unflappable Leaf Nin's eyes widen, gave Tsunade no small feeling of satisfaction. But it didn't do much to dilute the rage. True anger, which most of the shinobi of Konoha had never seen, with the notable exception of Jiraiya, made her tone cold, her wording exact. You skipped out on the meeting. It wasn't a question. Kakashi, eyes still slightly dilated from the fear all shinobi experienced when unable to move, hands pinned above his head in a way that made forming seals impossible, nodded. Tsunade hissed through her teeth. She really should have noticed that Kakashi had used a doppelganger, but of all the meetings for him to play hooky for, she hadn't expected him to be foolish enough to miss this one. Why weren't you there? It took all the self-control she possessed not to add, you stupid brat. There was still some pleasure in seeing Kakashi swallow a few times before he gained enough confidence to speak. I was following Sasuke. Her balloon of anger deflated. She set Kakashi down. And? Kakashi averted his eyes. Tsunade focused in on the copy ninja. The Uchiha heir had to have done something bad for Kakashi to be so. He was brooding in a tree. Embarrassed? Kakashi didn't get embarrassed. He read pornography, for God's sake. Still, it was pretty funny. When not training, Sasuke did very little but brood. Tsunade would have called it sulking, but the young prodigy had no sense of humor to speak of, and he would not find any humor in it. He also wrote the occasional depressing soliloquy, but no one but Tsunade knew about that. Tsunade wouldn't have known about them either, except for the fact she had no computations about breaking and entering into the home of someone who more than once had displayed suicidal tendencies. They were actually rather good, in an Edgar Allan Poe sort of way, but Tsunade didn't think it was entirely healthy to write poems almost exclusively about pain and loneliness and death. She would have recommended counseling, but sessions with the angry young man were bound to be disturbing, and she didn't think any of the healers were well trained enough to handle it. Tsunade herself didn't have the time. That's it. Pretty much. I worry about that kid. He doesn't date, he doesn't socialize, he doesn't even talk outside of mission briefings. Tsunade looked at the copy ninja. Come to think of it, you don't do much of that either. When was the last time you went somewhere? Last year. Ah, yes. Guy's wedding. To Anko, of all people. When the two had first started dating, Tsunade hadn't thought they'd last a week, but their shared insane zest for life and powerful personalities kept them together. Having compatible fighting styles had cinched it. Kakashi had been best man. It might have been Lee, but the young taijutsu expert had wanted to walk down the aisle with Sakura, who had been one of the bridesmaids, so he had become a groomsman instead. The Jounin were still ridiculously happy together. Everyone dreaded the day the two of them decided to have kids. Okay, when was the last time you went out with someone? About a year and a half. That would be about the time he had broken up with Irika. If Anko and Guy were weird together, Kakashi and Irika were just wrong. They had nothing in common at all. Irika was a teacher, Kakashi a jounin. They didn't like the same things, and they didn't even know the same people. The only reason they had stayed together so long was because of their shared memories of that fox kid, Naruto. Kakashi hadn't seemed that broken up about it when the two of them had split, but the copy ninja hid his emotions so well that Tsunade wasn't sure her assessment of his emotional state had been accurate. That long. What, are you still heartsick? Kakashi shook his head. There just isn't anyone I care enough about to bother with. That pretty much summed up Kakashi. Most of the people he loved were dead. Since he had parted ways with Irika, the only people the Jounin went out of his way for anymore were Sasuke and Sakura, his former students, and Guy, who, for all Kakashi never said it, was his best friend, despite their stupid rivalry that not even Guy took seriously anymore. Oh. Some things were starting to make sense. You know, I always wondered why you dated Irika to begin with, seeing as he's 6 years younger than you, cute, and not your type at all. Hokage-sama, shouldn't we be discussing? It really confused me, you know. I never remembered you going for a pretty face. But I thought that perhaps you two had found something to talk about. I never even considered that copy ninja Kakashi would be petty. Tsunade regretted the words the moment they came out of her mouth, seeing the pain in Kakashi's visible eye. It wasn't pettiness. At the time, I needed someone like him. Kakashi had started dating Irika just days after Anko and Guy began to get serious. Tsunade had never thought about it, but she had seen the signs before. Nothing sucked worse than falling in love with your best friend. Especially when said friend was as straight as a ruler, and had absolutely no idea of your feelings. Sometimes Tsunade felt that Konoha would have been spared a lot of grief if Orochimaru hadn't been so taciturn as an adolescent and Jiraiya was gay. She yanked herself back to the present. Hindsight wouldn't help here. And all Tsunade was doing was making things worse, bringing up old memories best forgotten. Perhaps you're right. This really is none of my business. Kakashi didn't answer as he walked back to the couch. But he took the chance to change the subject. So, how did it go? How did what go? What had they been talking about again? Oh yes, the Akatsuki representatives. As expected, Itachi led the delegation. His partner and Gaara were with him. It was the last one who confused the hell out of me. A short blonde kid with slitted blue eyes and fangs. He felt about as strong as a genin, which makes no sense since he is partnered with Gaara of the desert, and considering the Akatsuki accept no one below Jounin level. Which means he's strong enough to hide his power from me. Did he say anything? Not a word. Serious little guy. Could you read them? No, not a one. All of them are well trained. They easily mask their emotions. Which is exactly why I need you at those things. Even if Itachi still terrifies you. Kakashi gave no excuses. Tsunade hadn't expected any. Will you be with me tomorrow? A nod. Then Kakashi was gone. Tsunade sat down heavily at her desk, and put her face in her hands. She was the leader of a dying nation. The only other person besides herself who truly understood what was riding on this alliance was in a forest somewhere writing pornographic novels. This was exactly why she hadn't wanted to be Hokage to begin with. Of course, if she hadn't taken it, Jiraiya would have gotten the job. Suppressing a shudder, the Sannin went back to her paperwork. Didn't the damn pile ever get any smaller? Orochimaru-sama? Though his former leader, and now lover, could hide very little from him anymore, the Sannin still had masks that were all but impenetrable. "What are you planning, Reiko?" said former Stonin in question, just smiled. If you really wanted to know that, Oroki-kun, okay, that was an expression Kabuto recognized. Orochimaru hated Reiko-sama's nickname for him. You would take my offer and rejoin the Akatsuki as a council member. I value my independence, Reiko. I'm hardly going to give it up because of some curiosity. Reiko just smirked. Kabuto shivered. Ever since he had joined the Akatsuki 3 years ago, Reiko for whatever reason had found the relationship between himself and Orochimaru, for lack of a better word, cute. This was in several ways a good thing, for though Orochimaru was ostensibly allowed back in Akatsuki territory because he was a former member, Kabuto knew it was actually because of Reiko-sama's influence. However, this was less because she thought lovers shouldn't be apart, and more because she was angling for a threesome. She never did anything to pressure him, at least, and it wasn't like she stalked them, but Kabuto was still slightly uncomfortable with the innuendo that resulted from Reiko-sama seeing them together, even if they were doing nothing more damning than eating sushi. Though Orochimaru had his kinks, sleeping with a woman wasn't one of them, but he was careful to be polite on their encounters with the Akatsuki commander. Except now, when urgency overcame any attempts at self-preservation. Oroki-kun, if it was just curiosity, you wouldn't be asking me. Reiko, the Akatsuki and the Sound have an alliance. Now you are attempting to ally with the Leaf, who are the enemy of the Sound. I believe I have a right to know if you are trying to betray me. Oroki-kun, you haven't attacked the Leaf in almost 2 years. In fact, you haven't attacked anyone in over a year. If I didn't know better, Oroki-kun, I would think you were trying to make the Sound legitimate. Either way, one of the conditions of the alliance with the Leaf is we are not going to help them against the Sound. You shouldn't worry so much. You might get frown lines. At that, the Sound Nin's scowl deepened. Reiko, why do you seek an alliance with Konoha? Sending the Fox Kid, at that. It makes me wonder if you're trying to form a treaty at all, or you have some ulterior motives. That is for me to know and you to try and find out, Oroki-kun. Just walking out on the leader of the most powerful shinobi organization in the world probably wasn't the best idea, but Kabuto was relieved to see that Reiko-sama's indulgent look hadn't changed. He bowed quickly to his leader before accompanying his lover. Orochimaru-sama. Do you call him that in bed too? You would think after 3 years he would stop blushing. Reiko's laugh followed them out the door. Even though it had been some time since Orochimaru had found a healer skilled enough to remove the seals from his arms, the Sannin still gained an unusual amount of pleasure in forming chakra seals. Kabuto wasn't sure it was because of this or just the thrill of the fight that lit the Sound leader's face as his ninjutsu transformed the area into something that very much resembled the throat of a very large snake. At Kabuto's inquiring look, Orochimaru grinned. My own variation on Jiraiya's underworld technique. I take it if this was a real battle, I'd be dead right about now. Yes. The ninjutsu faded. In his usual abrupt fashion, Orochimaru changed the subject. Do you know what Reiko's planning? Kabuto shook his head. I may be one of the lead medics, but I don't think she's even told most of the council what this is about. One of the things Kabuto could count on about his lover was Orochimaru's frustration when his knowledge was lacking. Itachi-san and Kisame-san were the only ones given her orders. Reiko-sama is very secretive. I am growing increasingly frustrated with that woman. Well, we could always sleep with her and get the information that way. The startled look Orochimaru gave him was priceless, though it quickly gave way to an amused smirk. I'm always willing to try something once, Kabuto-kun. Kabuto smirked back. Sometimes he wondered what his life would have been like if he had been a Konoha shinobi in fact as well as name. The answer he had finally reached was rather dull. No one in Konoha had ever been smart enough to hold his attention for more than 5 minutes. Though his life now was rather complicated, it was never boring. And it was looking like it was going to get much more exciting soon. Kabuto wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Whenever Reiko-sama planned anything, the results were rather unexpected. And if Orochimaru hated being left in the dark, Kabuto hated being unprepared. Naruto woke up to a glass of water thrown in his face. He opened his eyes to see Itachi, Kisame, and Gaara, all fully dressed and looking slightly impatient. Kisame was holding the now empty glass. No surprise there. It wasn't like Gaara or Itachi would lower themselves to actually using something so mundane as a sink. You slept through your alarm again. Be dressed in 5 minutes or we're leaving without you. With that, Kisame and Itachi turned around and left the room. Gaara wordlessly handed Naruto his uniform and a toothbrush. Naruto swore. He'd gotten to sleep only a few hours ago. Nightmares. Again. Reiko-sama had warned him about the overflow. Naruto had long since gotten up wards around the Kyuubi's presence. He couldn't even hear the fox most of the time. When he could, it was because he had let his guard down, like when he had gotten drunk a few nights ago. Then, the Kyuubi had been as out of it as he was. But last night, exhaustion and frustration had cracked the shields. And the Kyuubi was occasionally malicious. Mostly just bad dreams. Still, it left Naruto in a bad mood, which wasn't improving as he threw on his clothes as fast as possible. Still, he wasn't angry enough to forget his bag. Considering what was in it, leaving the thing in his room would doubtlessly make Itachi very, very displeased. The ANBU escort was starting to get really annoying. Not that they ever said anything, but Naruto knew they listened to whatever the Akatsuki said, so talking was kind of limited. And they were walking way too close to them. He bumped into the one with the panda mask twice. Finally, Naruto got sick of it, and growled, "If you don't keep at least a 10-foot distance from me at all times, you'll find kunai stuck where it doesn't belong." They stared at him. Move. They moved. As the group progressed, Naruto felt a light tap on his shoulder. He looked to the side to see Kisame's sign. Red eyes. Oh. No wonder they got out of his way so fast. Well, that's what happened when he was sleep-deprived. The Kyuubi had a habit of leaking out in little ways. Finally, after what seemed like an unusually long time, they arrived at a place that was definitely not the meeting hall. But Naruto recognized it regardless, even if the place had been redecorated. The Hokage's office. He had been there often enough as a child, mostly getting scolded by Sandame after some particularly malicious prank. The welcoming party was much more limited this time. The female Hokage, 1 or 2 council members Naruto didn't know by name but remembered their faces and voices, the looks they had given him and the words spoken quietly, beyond the abilities of normal humans to hear. But Naruto wasn't normal. Even then, he had known there were those who thought Konoha would be better off with him dead. The old woman on the left was one of them. There were several others, most of whom Naruto didn't recognize, though the scarred examiner from the Chunin exams was there, seemingly for security, as he stood unobtrusively in a corner and surveyed the room with a hawk's wary eyes. The shinobi to the immediate right of the Hokage's chair was definitely a familiar face. Hatake Kakashi. The first look the silver-haired Jounin gave him was uninterested. The second was incredulous. Impossible. The Hokage, who had already started in on her welcoming speech, trailed off and glanced at her retainer. "Do you have something to add, Kakashi?" The Jounin didn't appear to notice anyone had spoken. He continued to stare at Naruto, who shifted uncomfortably. Kakashi had been at the meeting last night. Why hadn't he recognized Naruto then? Unless... The silent tapping on the inside of his wrist confirmed his suspicions, as Gaara signed. Bunshin. Naruto? More than one person in the room recognized that name. The counselor's eyes widened. The Chunin examiner raised one eyebrow. And Naruto, not seeing any easy way to refute his identity, rubbed the back of his head sheepishly in a way that would be all too familiar to his former sensei. There was a moment of absolute silence. That was all it took for everyone to process what had just happened and what it meant. Then the whispering started. Unbelievable. Killed. For years. Akatsuki. Traitor. That last set Naruto's teeth on edge, but the hand on his shoulder stopped him before he had even thought of appropriate retaliation. He turned around, expecting to see Kisame, but instead came face to face with Kakashi. Neither of them said anything. What could be said? Naruto was hard-pressed to come up with a reason for his actions that Kakashi would accept, and Kakashi, though he had often thought of what he would say if he was given the chance to speak once more to one of his dead comrades, had never even considered what he would say to one that was unexpectedly alive. They stood facing each other in uneasy silence as the level of sound in the room rose several decibels, Kisame looking on in amusement, Itachi stoic as usual, and Gaara's eyes growing more and more wild as claustrophobia set in. Naruto was most worried about that last. Gaara hated being in crowds, hated small rooms, and hated noise, and this situation had all three. Then the Hokage cleared her throat. No one paid attention. She cleared it again. Nothing. Quiet. All voices ceased. The Hokage's face smoothed out. She smiled, But there was an edge to her grin that alerted the room to the fact that disobeying the Hokage at this point was something of a death wish. Thank you. Now Kakashi, as you seem to have the best idea of what's going on, I will ask you to explain what is so important that we need to interrupt negotiations for it. Naruto is a former student of mine. Though Tsunade was no supreme genius, she could make deductions as easily as anyone. Kakashi, in the entirety of his illustrious career, had taken on a total of 3 students. One was the Uchiha boy, another the girl who had so caught Rock Lee's fancy. The last was Uzumaki Naruto, son of the Yondaime, and vessel of the Nine Tails. The kid also happened to be a former student of Jiraiya. She had heard he had died only a few weeks before she had accepted the position of Hokage, but obviously her information source was faulty. That would be the last time she would take a report from Jiraiya when he was half sloshed. She really should have noticed it herself. Despite the slit pupils and facial markings, the young man was the spitting image of his father at the same age. The hair was shorter on the sides and longer in the back, but still, it was pretty damn obvious. It had just never occurred to her, and blonde spiky hair, while uncommon, was hardly unheard of. She had attributed the resemblance to chance. Of course, she had never met the boy. Others at the meeting last night had, and none of them had said anything. For a bunch of shinobi, they weren't very observant. Of course, they could have just kept their mouths shut. Neither option made her happy. Tsunade couldn't stand it when people kept information from her. She had inherited this pet peeve from Orochimaru, or perhaps they had both acquired it after a number of missions that went sour because the intelligence they received prior to the jobs was so inaccurate they would have been better off with no briefing at all. Either way, it pissed her off. So this is the QB brat. Kind of short, isn't he? Instant bristling. For all she had heard about the child in demon form, it was kind of a letdown. From what she could see, the boy appeared to be the average young teenager, short-tempered and far too sensitive. But the boy was Akatsuki. They didn't let just anyone in. And this kid was one of the elite. They were the only ones that got the bands engraved with one of the 9 holy seals. And any one of them could take Kakashi head-on. And win. This was all very good to know, but could she do anything with the information? Besides making sure not to underestimate the child, not really. Naruto may be missing Nin, odd he didn't wear the usual /Tataiate headband that was one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Akatsuki, but he was here as a representative from a potential ally, so she didn't have any authority over him. If this treaty ever came through, she never would. This could become a very bad situation, very quickly. Kakashi still appeared to be in shock, but besides him and Ibiki, no surprise there. The interrogator's pulse never varied more than a few points either way no matter the situation. No one in the room was taking the revelation at all calmly. So far, the Akatsuki hadn't moved, but Gaara's eyes were growing more psychotic by the second. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. Disbelieving looks. As interesting as all of this is, we have more important things to discuss. Now then, I would like your reasons for wishing to ally with us, if you please. Our reasons aren't your concern. The Uchiha was quite the cold fish. His facial expression hadn't changed at all in the past 5 minutes. Yes, they are. Unless you give me some idea of what you want to get out of this. For all I know, you just set this whole thing up so you could get into Konoha unopposed. There was no response for almost 30 seconds. Then, with obvious reluctance, we desire free trade with Konoha. What does the Leaf get out of this? A bland look. Exchange of goods works both ways. Fine. We want access to your headquarters. The answer was immediate, unadvisable. A moment of silence. This is the point in the negotiations that you offer me something in place of what I want. The problem with sending shinobi as diplomatic representatives was this: they weren't diplomats. Tsunade wasn't looking forward to walking Itachi through the process of argument. We are willing to allow you into the village. You have a village? It is where we buy our supplies. Usually we kill any shinobi that enters the area without our authorization. Well, it was something, she supposed. Very well. In exchange, we will give permission for limited numbers of your members to. The council members, already agitated, erupted at this concession. Hokage-sama, you cannot possibly allow. Tsunade pinched the bridge of her nose and sighed. She may be the better negotiator, but it didn't look like the Uchiha's subordinates were going to give him any grief over his decisions. This might take a while. As far as Naruto could tell, things appeared to be going well. Sure, the counselors were giving him some occasional dirty looks, but that wasn't any different than how they had acted when he lived in Konoha. The situation was a little uncomfortable with Kakashi still staring at him in abject shock, but all in all, for this being the moment Naruto had been dreading the entire trip, it was pretty anticlimactic. The female Hokage was seemingly unflappable. After getting everyone to shut up, she went right on with the negotiations like nothing had happened. So Naruto did what he had been trained to do in similar delicate situations. He stayed out of the way and tried to get Gaara to calm down. This was easier said than done. The guy was already hyperventilating. It had only been about an hour since his last meditation, but stress caused the calming effects of inner peace to wear off Gaara more quickly. The best method for soothing Shikaku was to distract Gaara. The bald guy looks like his mother cheated on his father with a goat. Has the facial hair for it too. He couldn't distract Gaara out loud, of course. Code sign was diverse enough to that one could hold entire conversations, and could be visual or tactile. Luckily, that was one tutoring session Naruto hadn't slept through. It seemed to be working too. Gaara's breathing even out. That old man to the left of us looks dead. I think he's just sleeping though. I can hear his snoring. It was definitely working. Gaara was even smiling a little. Naruto, encouraged, continued. And that redhead in the back, oh boy. Kid, Itachi has been signaling you for the past 5 minutes. Get your little act going before he becomes tempted to break one of your arms. The problem was Kisame wasn't even joking. Itachi had actually broken 3 of Naruto's fingers one mission a few years ago when he had been careless enough to let an enemy shinobi through the gate he had been guarding. Best not to antagonize the ninja with limited impatience and swirly red eyes. Time to get this show on the road. Good thing he hadn't forgotten his pack. Then Itachi would really have killed him. Naruto hadn't realized how much stuff he carried around in his bag. His spare kunai and shuriken, a sleeping bag, rope, some instant ramen, an extra change of clothing, some washing detergent, a toothbrush, toothpaste, a book Reiko-sama had given him on customs in the Stone Country, some antidepressants from Tsukiyoki Naruto thought he had gotten rid of. He hastily shoved them back into his pack. Kisame had threatened him with bodily harm if he ever saw Naruto with drugs again, some tissues, a flashlight, glue, a towel, a CD player, 6 CDs, a pad of paper, 2 pens, a hacky sack. By the time he had gotten to the Pocky and was smelling it to see if it was still good, half the room was staring at him and the increasingly gigantic pile of mostly useless junk. Even the negotiations had trailed off as the Lady Hokage gained some curiosity as to what the Kyuubi boy was looking for. Kisame, who was more aware than anyone how much of a pack rat Naruto was, just rolled his eyes. He had long since given up on figuring out how the kid managed to fit so much garbage into a single bag. Finally, with a triumphant exclamation of victory, Naruto found it. Besides his Hitayite headband safely hidden with his weaponry in his waist pouch, it was his most valuable possession. The room gasped, knocking Kakashi out of his stupor. More than one jaw dropped, and in the corner, Marino Ibiki's eyes widened. Hey, Lady Hokage, He had practiced this speech, damn it. Why couldn't he remember what he was going to say? The Lady Hokage filled the silence with a stuttering, It can't be. What? You mean Raijin? It'd better be real. It was a real pain in the ass to get the thing, and I'd be really pissed off if I went to all that trouble for a fake. Really smooth idiot. Anyway here. It had taken a lot of resolve to decide and give up the lightning blade, but considering everything, it was worth it if the gift would help bring about peace between the Akatsuki and Konoha. After one last look at the ornately carved hilt, he placed Raijin carefully on the Hokage's desk. She stared at it uncomprehendingly. It's for you. Well, I guess it's really for Konoha, since it belonged to the village before it was stolen. How did you come to possess Raijin? The examiner was the last person Naruto had expected to talk at this thing. Huh! The scarred shinobi's face tightened, and it was obvious how much effort he was putting into resisting the urge to shake the information he sought out of Naruto. The next words spoken sounded strained. Why do you have the sword? Well, about a year ago, a jounin from the rain came to Kaizen village. The port town was technically a part of the Cloud Country, but after the Akatsuki had laid claim to it, no one disputed their right to the place. The villagers hardly minded. Considering the dangers of marauders and pirates, having the headquarters of a shinobi organization so close was a blessing, especially since they didn't charge anything to kill anyone who bothered the villagers. The extra trade was welcome too, and since the shinobi only discouraged travelers that were also ninja, business hardly suffered. So both parties were happy with the arrangement. The day the Rain Jounin entered Kaizen, Naruto and Gaara had just gotten back from a rather difficult reconnaissance mission in Waterfall. They had managed to find out where the local shinobi had hidden the ceremonial armor, a cave protected by water spirits. How original, but spending so much time immersed past his chin in cold, glacier water, winter had just ended, had given Naruto a very bad cold. Kabuto was the medic assigned to him. Normally such a skilled healer wouldn't have been necessary for something so minor. If it had been any other time, Naruto would have just spent a few days in bed, then a few weeks regaining his chakra levels before going on another assignment. But considering the beginning of the elite trials was in less than 2 weeks, Reiko-sama didn't want one of the prime candidates to be at anything but his best. Even so, as Naruto sniffled miserably while Kabuto took his temperature, it would be a day or two before he was strong enough to begin training again. Speeding up the healing process too much would unnecessarily drain his chakra reserves and tax his body too much. At least that's what Kabuto had told him. Naruto had asked why it mattered when he had so much chakra, but the Kabuto's glare told him that though Naruto's stamina might be nigh unlimited, the medic's patience was not. So he suffered in silence as Kabuto made contemplative noises over the thermometer. What? What is it? You appear to have a fever along with the cold, Naruto-kun. That will add another couple of days to your bed rest. What? I can't. The elite trials, if I'm not better by then, Sen and Michio will kick our asses. Matsushita-sen and Iwamori Michio were Naruto and Gaara's prime rivals for the trials. Sen was only a few years older than Gaara and Naruto, though Michio was in his late 20s. They were from the grass and stone villages, respectively, but for whatever reason, their personalities and skills had clicked so well that when they worked together, short of going full demon, Naruto and Gaara were hard-pressed to beat them, even though individually they were more than a match for the former stone and grass nin. Actually, Naruto rather liked Sen and Michio. Sen reminded Naruto strongly of Hinata. Though Sen was undoubtedly a guy, he definitely had the shy, won't-look-you-in-the-eye thing going on, and Michio was a bigger, more competent, and better-natured version of Kiba, albeit without the dog. The two partnerships were hardly rivals, and wouldn't be competing at all if it weren't for the unexpected death of the elite Muraguchi Kato by ambush and the subsequent suicide of his partner, Fujiwara Ayame, immediately after she had handed Reiko-sama the heads of the hunter nin who had killed Kato. Naruto had never met them, though he had bypassed the pair once while they were leaving Reiko-sama's office. Kato had looked the solemn type, but Ayame had been chattering to him non-stop nonetheless as they walked out the door, mostly about stupid stuff like the new dress she had bought when they were on their mission in Mist, though Kato never said a word. Naruto had wondered how they had ended up as partners, since they seemed to have so little in common. By tradition, only 9 elite were numbered among the Akatsuki. Since the organization's founding, 1 had left, Orochimaru, 2 had died after foolishly challenging Kisame and Itachi for the position of commanding elite team. Naruto hadn't known them. They had been killed only a few months after he had arrived in Kaizen, and now, another partnership had departed for the sparring grounds in the sky, which left 2 positions open. Both Michio and Naruto wanted them, and Sen and Gaara were willing to go along with it, though Gaara had only acquiesced so Naruto would stop interrupting his meditation. His cold was very badly timed. This wasn't a situation where he'd have another shot if he screwed up. If he didn't make elite, it'd be years before another partnership kicked the bucket and positions opened up again. And considering the average age of Akatsuki members was in the low 30s, no one was likely to retire anytime soon. Naruto needed to be at full strength for this. Not only for the extra pay, which was tempting enough in itself, but for the opportunity to listen in on council meetings and get access to Reiko-sama's personal library, and all the other perks that came with the rings that engraved upon were the kanji of the gods. Kabuto sighed, and pushed his glasses back up to the bridge of his nose. Don't be ridiculous, Naruto-kun. The fever is very minor. You'll be at full strength by the trials. Don't worry so much. Then he left, after leaving Naruto with some nasty-smelling concoctions and instructions to take them every 12 hours. All of this left Naruto, who hated being sick, in a very bad mood, which wasn't improved when barely half an hour later he was called to the meeting hall. Shrugging into his uniform was a chore Naruto would normally do without, but the meeting hall meant it was official. Repainting his nails was also a pain, but the polish had gotten chipped in waterfall, and even though Naruto couldn't care less about the Akatsuki's reputation, he knew the aura of mystique and power was what got them so many jobs despite the fact they were technically a rogue faction. And it did make his nails look sharper, especially if he double-coated. Definitely a plus. With his tousled hair and lack of stature, Naruto needed all the intimidation points he could get. Yanking his hair into a short horsetail as he hurried through the corridors of the headquarters, Naruto swore under his breath as he struggled with his hairbands. They happened to be the same brand as Itachi's, mainly because the hair ornaments that particular company produced were unusually durable and elastic, though Naruto liked the black hair ties while Itachi for the most part used the dark red. They looked good set against the Sharingan user's midnight black mane, though Naruto rather thought he had chosen the color because they were the exact shade of drying blood and not for aesthetic reasons. A sudden sneeze distracted Naruto from his inner blather and sent him scrambling for the tissues. Had he mentioned that he hated being sick? Upon arrival at the meeting hall, he came upon a not completely unfamiliar scene. Reiko, with her usual enigmatic, benevolent smile, looked down upon a man in the middle of the room. One thing obvious right off was everything about the guy practically screamed arrogance. Stupid smirk, an umbrella, of all things, over one shoulder, weight leaned mostly to one side in a stance that would get him killed in a fight. He inexplicably reminded Naruto of Sasuke, though Sasuke's posture had never screamed queen. Like this guy's did. Even Orochimaru didn't stand like that. The idiot's smirk grew as he turned to witness Naruto's entrance. His voice, while melodious, still managed to be annoying. "Is this one of your followers, Reiko-sama? I wasn't aware the Akatsuki hired children. Definitely an idiot. For one thing, no Akatsuki member would take kindly to being called a follower. Most left their villages because they didn't like to follow orders, which was why the Akatsuki command structure was rather more loose than the official shinobi villages. For another thing, Naruto was no younger than Itachi had been when the Uchiha renegade had joined the Akatsuki, and Itachi would have probably killed anyone so stupid as to call him a child. The same thing applied to Gaara, though with his partner Naruto wouldn't have bothered with the probably. Despite the insult, Reiko-sama's voice managed to remain pleasant. Naruto-kun, she had thankfully stopped with it, Chan about a year ago, is an exemplary member of our organization. He is young, but his skills more than make up for his lack of experience. The idiot didn't respond, but his smirk remained. The guy was good-looking. Even in the half-darkness, Naruto could see the fineness of his features, the artful disarray of his wavy forest green hair. The jackass probably uses gel. Naruto wasn't impressed. He had known Itachi, so gorgeous at first glance people thought him a woman, for years, and knew how easily a beautiful exterior could hide inner darkness. Or inner asininity. Naruto-kun, I would like you to meet Rokusho Aoi. He is a jounin from the Hidden Rain, and wishes to become a member of the Red Moon. KSH. What's he got that makes him worthy to join us? From what I can see, and Naruto shot the Rain Jounin a contemptuous look that would have done Sasuke proud, I'm not impressed. This should have at least made the guy glare a little, but if anything his smirk grew even wider. Oh, don't worry Naruto-kun, I have something that makes me more than worthy to become a part of this esteemed association. Okay, that pissed Naruto off. In no way, shape, or form had this guy earned the right to be so familiar with him. He was just asking for a beatdown. Reiko-sama's tone, while mild, still managed to remain slightly intimidating. Rokusho-san, I believe I will be the judge of how compatible you are with the Akatsuki. May I ask what you possess that so convinces you of your suitability? Naruto thought the guy's face would split in half as his smirk turned to a full-out grin when he pulled an object, a little more than a foot long, out of his waist pouch. Naruto peered at it, confused. A carved stick? What do you think that's going to do? Reiko-sama wasn't nearly so scornful. A speculative expression adorned her countenance, and Naruto used all the big words he knew up in one sentence. Interesting. Rokusho-san, how did you come about the Raijin? The what? I took it from Konoha. Hardly a challenge. Those fools didn't put up any resistance at all. Konoha? Stealing the sword of the second Hokage is an impressive feat, Rokusho-san. Wait a second, Raijin was the lightning blade? The lightning blade? How in hell did this cretin get it? Very well, I will give you a 2 weeks trial run. If you continue to impress me, I will commission you as an Akatsuki active. What the fuck? Naruto had the dubious comfort of not being alone in his opinion of Rokusho Aoi. Itachi didn't like him because the jackass had the audacity to flirt with the Uchiha prodigy, and didn't know how to take a hint. Kisame didn't like him for the same reason, and the fact Aoi seemed to think himself above everyone else. Naruto knew for a fact that Kisame had a hit list for the people the former Miss Nin found especially annoying, and he usually went out of his way to make those people as miserable as possible, with Naruto on occasion acting as backup. Aoi's name had been marked down less than a day after his arrival. Sen was scared of the guy because he practically stalked the former Grass Nin, even molesting him whenever Sen was alone. Michio swore he would kill Aoi if he ever caught the Rain Nin in the act, but Aoi was careful to only bother Sen when Michio was otherwise engaged. Gaara's eyes narrowed at the sight of the man, and Kabuto fidgeted with his glasses whenever Aoi was mentioned, though Naruto wasn't worried about him, seeing as Orochimaru would torture to death anyone who even thought about touching Kabuto, Reiko-sama or no Reiko-sama. Even Tsukiyoki Yukio, the pharmaceutical specialist who wasn't adverse to selling recreational drugs on the side, and who normally didn't care about a guy's personality as long as he had a nice body and a pretty face, thought Aoi was distasteful. The guy would have gotten the crap beaten out of him sooner or later, except for Reiko-sama's edict that he was not to be harmed, hurt, or otherwise found strung up in a tree for fear of a lecture, which mostly consisted of Reiko-sama pounding you into unconsciousness for the better part of an hour. While Itachi hardly lived in fear of this, Aoi at least had the sense to stay mostly off of the genius's radar. Naruto would have been happy as the next ninja to teach the guy a lesson, but recovery from his cold and the subsequent training for the elite trials with Gaara took up every spare moment of free time he had. By the time the trials rolled around, however, it proved to be well worth it, with Gaara and Naruto defeating Sen and Michio was something that wasn't ease, but certainly wasn't their all-out best. It helped that Sen was so rattled from his encounters with Aoi that his concentration was much worse than usual, which broke the uncanny rhythm between himself and Michio that usually made them so deadly. Naruto felt slightly guilty for taking advantage of this weakness, but if he could get over his cold, Sen should get over his personal problems when in the middle of a fight. So it was a triumphant Naruto, bruised and bleeding but high on victory, that trumped into the headquarters meeting hall with a grin on his face and the giddy anticipation of a kid on Christmas morning. Then he found coal in his stocking. Aoi was standing in the meeting hall, in the same place Naruto had first seen him 2 weeks ago. And next to him on a hanger was an Akatsuki coat. Naruto froze. Naruto-kun, Reiko-sama's voice was warm. Congratulations on your victory. Naruto ignored the compliment. What's going on? Rokusho-sen had proved adequately strong to join us. That stupid smirk. The urge to punch it off the jackass's face proved almost irresistible. Naruto clenched his fists hard enough that the recently sharpened nails drew blood. But Reiko-sama wasn't finished. There is just one more test I want to have him go through. Nothing too difficult. Just a fancy of mine. She turned to Naruto. Naruto-kun, I know it's unorthodox and you've already proved you're more than powerful enough to join the elite, but I would appreciate you doing one last thing for me before I present you with the ring. This smile was anything but benevolent. Fight Rokusho-san for me, will you? Rokusho-san, calm down. I don't expect you to defeat Naruto-kun. I just expect you to survive against him for, let's say, 5 minutes? If you last through the time limit, I will make you Akatsuki. If you don't, Naruto-kun gets his elite status. Simple. Aoi's rather hysterical expression smoothed out. The smirk came back. Really? Out came Raijin, and for the first time, Naruto saw the blade. It looked kind of pathetic, not even a yard long. But it blazed with chakra. That shouldn't be any trouble. And with no warning, he rushed at Naruto. Naruto was tired. His normal chakra reserves were mostly gone, the cut on his forehead, one that could have been avoided if he wore a forehead protector, and the sole reason he regretted not scratching his leaf Hittite headband, leaked blood into his eyes, and he ached for ramen. He wasn't in the best shape for a fight. But none of that mattered when he saw the enemy, and all higher brain functions stopped, to be replaced by sheer adrenaline and the thrill of battle. As the blade arched towards his head, Naruto retained enough sense to dodge under the strike and reach for the hilt. Grasping it in his left hand, he clenched the right into a fist and slammed it into Aoi's stomach. The Rain Jounin staggered back, surprise written all over his face. He hadn't expected Naruto to be so fast. Naruto kept on moving, this time giving Aoi a rather vicious uppercut that lifted him his feet off the ground and sent him skidding across the floor. This time, it was Naruto who smirked. Not very good with that thing, are you? Staggering to one knee, Aoi glared at him. Stupid brat. Before he managed to get to a standing position, Naruto had the front of Aoi's tunic in one fist. The Rain Nin's eyes widened. He hadn't even seen Naruto move. The demon-possessed shinobi leaned in close to Aoi's face. His voice was dangerously soft. I only allow one person to call me brat. You aren't it. And Naruto threw Aoi viciously into the wall. The Jounin hit with a rather sickening crack, and slid to the ground. And Naruto turned away. Considering how easily he had taken the guy down, Naruto thought the fight was over, but before he had gotten 5 steps, a sharp pain blossomed between his shoulder blades. Naruto fell to his knees, but managed to roll out of the way when dozens of Saban needles pierced the ground where he had crouched only a moment before. He looked up to see Aoi. The Jounin's face was clenched in fury, and blood dripped off the back of his head. The jackass had attacked from behind. Stupid brat. I am going to kill you. It was Aoi this time who had his opponent's shirt in his hand, but he was tall enough to lift Naruto completely off the ground. The blonde shinobi's vision swam. He could feel something wet slide down his back, and knew with a cold certainty that Raijin was still lodged between his shoulder blades. But Naruto didn't think of that. The one thing that ran through his mind, the one thought that dominated all others, was that he was going to die, because the jackass had attacked from behind. Naruto's shields cracked. This human attacked us. He must die. We must kill him. For once, Naruto's thoughts were completely in sync with the Kyuubi's. He's dead meat. And Naruto's vision went blood red. The first thing Naruto was aware of when he regained consciousness was a horrible taste in his mouth. The second was a similarly horrible smell right under his nose. He opened his eyes to see Kabuto's face less than 6 inches from his own. Ah! The smelling salts seemed to have done the job. Hold still, Naruto-kun. Naruto couldn't help but wince at the medic Nin shone a light in one eye, then the other. The pupils are dilating properly, so he at least managed to avoid a concussion. Naruto started to look himself over, but froze at the sight of the blood that caked his hands. What happened? The nasty taste in his mouth was still there. Like metal. You were stupid, kid. You turned your back on an enemy you weren't sure was dead. Even with your healing abilities, Raijin is going to leave a pretty nasty scar on your back. Kisame pityingly shook his head. You got your butt kicked by the more effeminate shinobi within a league. Orochimaru's more of a girl than Aoi, and he still manages to kick everyone's ass. Kabuto wavered between taking offense and being flattered on behalf of his lover, but he finally decided on ignoring the comment and went back to examining his patient. You let out the Kyuubi. Gaara. What was Gaara doing here? Naruto thought his partner had gone to take a bath. How long had he been unconscious? About an hour. It no longer freaked him out that the former Sannin could read his expressions so easily. They were Akatsuki, but more importantly, they were partners. It was to be expected. Where is? Kisame gestured. Naruto looked. His mouth dropped open. What in hell? Rakusho Aoi's throat had been torn out, his face frozen in an expression of pure horror. His eyes were wide, glazed over. His stomach was torn open. Naruto finally identified the taste in his mouth. Dried blood. His mouth was coated in dried blood, and something chewy was stuck in his teeth. Naruto gagged, bile rising in his throat. Oh gods. He'd eaten Aoi, hadn't just killed him, he'd eaten him. What's your problem, kid? You've killed before. Not like this. His biggest fear had come to pass. The Kyuubi had taken over, controlled his body, his chakra. He didn't even remember killing Aoi. 2 hands rested on Naruto's shoulders. He tried to flinch away, but they held him fast. You didn't lose control, Naruto-kun. You agreed with the Kyuubi's actions. You willingly let the 9 tails fight Aoi. He didn't wrestle control from you. You just got a little out of hand, that's all. Now sit back down. I stitched your back together, but at this rate you're going to pull all the threads out and ruin an hour's work. Naruto collapsed back onto the ground. Kabuto must have given him some pretty strong anesthetic. He didn't have any feeling between the beginning and end of his spine. By the way, Naruto-kun, here. I believe this now belongs to you. Naruto blinked at the ornately carved sword hilt Reiko-sama pressed into his palm. Wah! The sedatives appeared to be kicking in. He always got less articulate when drugged to the gills. You defeated Aoi, so you deserve his prized possession. But I don't want it. At least that's what Naruto intended to say, but before the words managed to form in his mouth, everything again went black. Why do I want this thing again? It didn't do Aoi much good. Nothing's wrong with the sword, kid, the incompetent just didn't know how to use it properly. By the way he swung Raijin around, it was obvious he hadn't had any sword training. Which you're going to get. But I don't want that. Yes, you do. After several months and many bruises, Naruto finally got used to wielding Raijin, and it was a pretty useful weapon, seeing as it could block chakra. By the time the mission to Konoha started, he was even starting to become fond of the thing. But not enough that he wasn't willing to part with it. Good sword or not, it had some bad memories attached to it. Aoi had probably deserved to die, but no one deserved to be eaten. And gods, he had tasted disgusting. Sakura-san? The fact that Lee reverted to formalities whenever he was unsure about something had always been a little endearing in the past, but right now, it just irritated her. Lack of sleep, mostly, as she worried about the consequences of the Akatsuki alliance, and cursed herself for not pushing hard enough to enter the Jounin exams this year. She had been depending on Lee for some information regarding the meeting last night, but despite the fact he had made Jounin a year ago, her sweet but ever so slightly clueless boyfriend had spent the evening in an extended training session with Guy. She probably should have told Lee she had wanted him to go, but they'd been dating over a year, and damn it, he should be able to read her mind by now. What is it, Lee? Not the most friendly greeting, and Sakura slightly regretted her harsh tone as Lee flinched and looked away. He might have been able to call himself a master of the Lotus style, and his record might be good enough that he had been asked on numerous occasions to join an ANBU squad, but Lee's self-esteem was still a little shaky when it came to a lot of things. Like her. Stupid boy, Sakura thought, more than a little fondly. You would think after a year he would know my feelings for him run far deeper than that crush I had on Sasuke-kun. Sakura-san, I'm sorry to impose, but Anko-sensei, another weird quirk of his. When father figures get married, most people are at least slightly resentful against the new wife for a while, but Lee had instantly started addressing Anko as sensei, apparently the highest form of respect he could think of. Anko, who found Lee darling for various reasons, had actually been rather pleased, was at the meeting last night, and she gave me a little information about the Akatsuki representatives. I could tell you a little about them. Sakura was having trouble remembering her reasons for rejecting Lee's advances 4 years ago. Was she really so shallow as to turn him down on the basis of his hair, eyebrows, and clothes? The Chunin jacket covered most of the sheer greenness of the jumpsuit, and it was slightly gratifying to see how it defined his muscles. And at least she had convinced him to let his hair grow out. The long braid look was much more appealing on him than the bowl cut had ever been. Okay, so she was a little shallow. Thank you, Lee. She let her mind wander as he relayed the descriptions to her. Having an eidetic memory was occasionally good for something, though it always seemed to desert her when she needed her jutsus most. She wasn't surprised to learn Sasuke's brother numbered among the delegation. Or Gaara. Gaara still slightly scared her, though she hadn't seen the Suna shinobi in 4 years. Strangulation by sand was a memory she probably would never forget. Her mind abruptly focused back in on Lee when his description of the last Akatsuki, short, spiky blonde hair, facial markings, and sharpened teeth, struck a chord in her. That sounds like Naruto. Lee quirked his head to the side. He hadn't known Naruto that well, but he had confided in her that he had greatly admired the genin, for his never-say-die attitude and unwillingness to stay down. Though Lee never said as much, Sakura knew he measured himself up to Naruto, and constantly found himself short. Of course he did. Amazing as he had been alive, Naruto dead left too big a shadow to ever really be surpassed. Naruto-kun? I suppose it does. They watched the passerby for a while, but before long, Sakura could no longer stand the silence and the thoughts of a teammate years gone. Lee, let's go for a walk, okay? He instantly brightened up, apparently believing that all had been forgiven. She had never been really angry with him to begin with, but sometimes, it was nice to see how happy it made him just to be with her. Sasuke had never taken any notice of her, no matter how hard she tried to get his attention. He was barely passable as a friend, sporadically seen and never there when she needed him. He would have been a perfectly terrible boyfriend. It was still impossible to picture him showing up with a bouquet of flowers and a box of chocolates, with reservations to the nicest restaurant in town, as Lee had last Valentine's Day. Despite the romance stories she had loved as a child, having a considerate, loving boyfriend was infinitely better than a moody, callous one who didn't even seem to care whether you lived or died. Sakura had for a long time relied on faith, in the belief that Sasuke just hid her feelings for her. After a while, she couldn't do it anymore. Though Sasuke on occasion showed a liking for her company, Sakura just didn't possess the endless self-confidence that was needed to go for an entire lifetime without hearing the words, "I love you." Sakura, is something wrong? You seem kind of distracted. She glanced to the side at Lee and smiled. No. In fact, nothing could be better. Despite the absolute truth of this, Sakura couldn't suppress the niggling doubt that things were just going to worse from here, and the situation was more delicate than she knew. Screw the diet. This was the absolute last time she went without breakfast. She always felt depressed when her blood sugar was low. Where the hell is he? Which he are you talking about? Taiyuya sneered at Kidomaru. Orochimaru-sama, of course. He told us he was going to Kaizen. I know that, shithead. But it's been over a week. He's never gone that long, even when Kabuto is keeping him occupied. The six-armed shinobi shrugged, and went back to his knitting. Taiyuya ragged him endlessly about his hobby, but Kidomaru was long practiced at ignoring her. I bet that bitch Hirayama pulled something. Taiyuya, a girl shouldn't use such. Shut up. They were all on edge. The rumors of the Akatsuki-Konoha alliance was what had persuaded Orochimaru to go to Kaizen to begin with. All of them suspected treachery. All of them could do nothing about it, and they all reacted to the stress in different ways. Taiyuya became even more abrasive with her comrades. Kidomaru became obsessively single-minded about completing useless projects he normally couldn't care less about. Jirubu ate compulsively, which was nothing new, but his usual enjoyment in the food disappeared. Kimimaro just became quiet. As always when Orochimaru was not in the village, the leader of the Sound Five spent an inordinate amount of time by the window, waiting for their master to return. Ever since Kimimaro's disease had been cured by the same healer who had fixed Orochimaru's arms, he had resumed his duties as Orochimaru's second. No one was sure why Orochimaru hadn't taken over Kimimara's body as originally planned, even though their master's explanation was that Kabuto's defection to the Akatsuki meant Orochimaru required a new right hand, and only Kimimaro possessed the sufficient power and loyalty to be equal to the task. None of them bought it, but what could they say? Why would they say anything, for that matter? The Sound had gained power over the past 4 years. They were not yet equal to the 5, now 4, great villages, but their strength exceeded the Rain, Grass, and Waterfall, the most prominent of the minor villages. The treaty with the Akatsuki was only an expression of this, and didn't mean much in the long run. It was only a non-aggression and trade pact, and they did not help each other against their enemies. And relations were strained at best between the two factions. Reiko and Orochimaru were amiable enough most of the time, but ever since the incident, meetings between the Sound Five and a few of the weaker elite teams more often than not came to blows. Though the 5 fought constantly between themselves, when one of them was hurt by an outsider, they closed borders. The Sound protected their own. Only Kimimaro's even temper and the hold Uchiha Itachi possessed over the Akatsuki elite had prevented any more deaths since the first. 3 years ago, shortly after Kabuto's defection, Toyozen Yasuo, a former Cloud Nin whose chosen weapon was sharpened wire, challenged Sakan of the West Gate to a spar. No one knew why the scarred Akatsuki elite had chosen the effeminate Sakan for his opponent. Sakan hadn't cared, and he eagerly accepted the challenge of a fight. No one besides Yasuo's partner had been present for the battle. Everyone else had been occupied, and Orochimaru hadn't even been in the country, as he was seeking some obscure jutsu to the west. No one even knew the fight was going on. Jiruba later admitted he had heard Sakan mention a fight, but he hadn't paid any attention at the time. Everyone still didn't know what exactly had taken place that cold autumn day, in the woods that lay directly between Sound and Akatsuki territory. But it didn't take a genius to figure out who had lost. It was Kimimaro who found Sakan, hours after the fight had taken place, and days since the West Gate shinobi had left the Sound without telling anyone. Kimimaro had taken Taiya and Kidomaru to search for their comrade, leaving Jirubu as the slowest in charge of the Sound until their return. The scene that met Kimimaro's eyes hadn't been pretty. He knew he had come upon the battleground when he came to an area where the trees were sliced to pieces, and the stink of blood permeated the air, even through the soaking rain that had started shortly after they had left Sound Village. And in the middle of it was Sakan, drenched in his own blood and covered with lacerations that could have only come from a very thin blade. Or a very sharp wire. But the worst of it was the sight of Sakan cradling a head identical to his own, as sobs racked his crippled frame. Yukon. Oh gods, Yukon. Please don't be dead. You can't be. Please. As Kinemaro knew they were going to come after the battle was over, he had thought to bring medical supplies. Sakan didn't even react when Kimimaro tapped him on the shoulder, which alerted the white-haired shinobi to how bad exactly the situation was. Even when gravely wounded, Sakan had always been fiercely protective of his personal space. After Kimimaro alerted Kidomaru and Taiya to his position and started stripping his comrade, it became blindingly obvious he didn't have sufficient supplies or medical expertise to deal with Sakan's condition. The wire had torn through all the muscles in Sakan's left ankle, cut to the bone, and the shinobi had lost far too much blood. But the worst was his back, as the wires had sheared off more than Yukon's head. Kimimaro again reached for his earpiece. Taiya, Kidomaru, double time it. We have to move Sakan immediately. Taiya's reply was scornful. How badly did the fag get himself beat this time? Yukon is dead, and unless we get Sakan to a qualified healer, my best estimate is he has 3 hours to live. That was the first and last time Kimimaro witnessed Taiya at a loss for words. It had taken months for Sakan to heal. The healers had managed to save the foot, but scars ravaged Sakan's body, and his soul wasn't so readily salvaged. The brothers had been inordinately close, and not only in the physical sense. Despite the fact that Sakan had control of their body, he had still deferred to Yukon as the older brother. Without Yukon, Sakan was lost. It was only a few days after the healers had declared Sakan fit enough for active status that Orochimaru had sent Sakan away. Even Kimimaro had been unaware of Sakan's whereabouts, and no one had found out anything until the pale shinobi returned. But now, it was 3 years later, and all of them had long since found out Sakan's assignment, which was why Taiya didn't bother to inquire as to where their comrade was. Whenever he wasn't in the Sound, an increasingly common occurrence, he was on his mission. The assignment status had recently gone from long-term to permanent. The mission specifics had been a surprise to everyone. Who would have thought that Sakan would be the one chosen to become the bodyguard of Orochimaru-sama's heir, or that the heir would require watching over? After all, Uchiha Sasuke had never needed protection before. Where were you last night? I was unexpectedly detained. One of the things Sakan hated most about this job was the vague answers. Depending on Sasuke's mood, either it would take forever to get the specifics or Sasuke would just pull rank to get Sakan to stop bothering him. And in this instance, Sakan really didn't care what Orochimaru's heir had been doing last night. When he first became Sasuke's bodyguard, a light chakra link had been set up between them, enabling Sakan to know instantly when the Uchiha was in danger. And he hadn't been. Why did you want to meet anyway? From his tree, Sasuke slipped lightly to the ground. As usual, he landed silently, and walked over to where Sakan leaned against a rather large boulder. Why the boy always insisted on invading his personal space, Sakan didn't know, but it was extremely irritating, as it forced him to look up, which only emphasized their height difference. When they had first met, Sakan had held a bare inch over the 12-year-old boy, and now, 4 years later, the teenager towered over him by a good 6 inches. A most distinctly uncomfortable feeling. Did Orochimaru know about this farce of an alliance? It's still Orochimaru-sama to you, Sakan snapped, and he only found out after the Akatsuki had left for Konoha. He went to Kaizen a few days ago to get the details from Hirayama. The effeminate shinobi smirked. Amazing, isn't it? You refused to come to the village because the Sound Akatsuki Treaty prevented you from taking action against your brother, and now another treaty is threatening your chances for revenge. How perfectly ironic. You have the absolute worst. Sakan saw the fist only in time to watch it descend, landing against the rock less than an inch from his face and cracking the boulder in two. When Sasuke was angry, meeting his eyes was a distinctly unnerving experience. Bloodline or no, the Sharingan's gaze was one straight out of the depths of hell. Though the Uchiha's voice was quiet, the tone was cold enough to make Sakan's blood feel as if it was freezing in his veins. Don't forget for one moment, Sakan, that when Orochimaru assigned you to me, you became my servant. I don't appreciate cheek. And Sakan's world erupted in pain as his curse seal involuntarily activated. He had long since learned to tolerate the discomfort that came with the curse seal's first 2 levels, but the third had been deliberately designed to be on the pain threshold of the user, but at the same time kept them conscious so they could reap the rewards of the additional power. If they could muster up the strength of will to move, that is. Sakan was hard-pressed to do this as he collapsed to the ground. He thought he might have screamed, but he wasn't entirely sure. Even the foot that dug into his shoulder blades and kept him from returning to a kneeling position was secondary, as the black marks writhed like leeches from his shoulder to every corner of his body, leaving nothing but agony in their wake. Through the red haze, Sakan thought he heard a voice, as low as a whisper but startling in the pain that made every word shake. Sasuke-sama? Please make it stop. Sasuke-sama? It took him a while to realize the voice was his own. The marks retreated back into his shoulder, and Sakan tried to remember how to breathe. The foot was removed from his back, but that pain didn't go away. Sasuke knew exactly where to hit for the most effect. Between his shoulder blades was the most scarred part of Sakan's entire body, and was the most sensitive to touch. Sakan knew from experience that it would be hours before the violated feeling would fade. You know I could do much worse to you. In an odd way, Sasuke's voice sounded vaguely apologetic, as it always did after these encounters. It was a stupid justification of violence, but Sakan knew it to be true. The Sharingan could do far more than copy jutsus. That was only the most basic of its uses, and by far the most harmless. The Sharingan was a tool of war, but more than that, it was intended as a tool of torture. One Sakan thankfully had not been exposed to. Yet. He pushed himself to his hands and knees, and tried not to throw up. Tell me about the Akatsuki representatives. It might have been better to ask before you went on your little power trip, you stupid child. But he knew better than to say it out loud. He maneuvered himself into a kneeling position, and tried to remember what little he had been told. Their leader is Uchiha Itachi, wielder of the main Sharingan, and elite commander. His partner is... I know about them. Tell me about the last one. The one no one recognizes. If no one recognizes him, how do you expect me to know anything about him? Sakan flinched as he said those words, but all Sasuke did was laugh. You are amazing, Sakan. Either you are extremely stupid or just extremely rebellious. And I know Orochimaru knows something, so don't try to lie to me. The hand that grasped his chin and forced Sakan to meet Sasuke's blood-red eyes was cold. You may have been a gift from Orochimaru, but both of us know that you belong to me now. There were some truths that couldn't be easily refuted. Ever since Sakan had been assigned as Sasuke's bodyguard, he had become aware of an ever-widening gap between their powers. Even without Sasuke's control over his cursed seal, Sakan knew he would lose the fight if he attempted to defy the Uchiha. And as ego-crushing as it was, Sakan knew that he needed a master. Yukon had been enough, and their relationship hadn't suffered because of Yukon's dominant role. But now Yukon was dead. And without Sasuke to control him, Sakan knew he couldn't lead himself. So Sakan told him. And all the Uchiha did was laugh. Naruto, eh? I didn't know he had it in him. This makes things much more interesting. Sasuke's smile was nothing short of insane. I've been dying for a rematch. Naruto didn't actually give the Konoha shinobi any of the details surrounding his acquisition of the lightning blade. Most of it was none of their business. So he gave a highly abbreviated and edited version of what actually happened instead. This guy named Rokusho Aoi from the rain tried to join the Akatsuki. The idiot attacked me from behind, so I killed him. I kept Raijin. I figure you people want the sword more than I do. There was an uncomfortable silence. Was a man named Idate with the rain Nin? Aoi came to the village alone, as far as I could tell. What, did he have a partner or something? A bitter smile crossed the examiner's lips. No. Just a student. The startled look finally left the Lady Hokage's face. This is a very generous gift. A pause. For a moment, Tsunade's eyes were distracted, and seemed to be looking at something that wasn't there. Then she dragged her consciousness back to the task at hand. Though it is early, I believe we should convene until the afternoon. You may explore the village if you wish, though I will ask you to allow your ANBU escorts to accompany you. Itachi nodded stiffly. Very well. Naruto hastily shoved his possessions back into his bag, though he made sure to toss the stale poke in the garbage on their way out. As usual when they were in a village with no particular mission in mind, as soon as they were outside, the two teams split and went in different directions. Their ANBU escort for a moment exchanged startled looks, before a quiet directive from their leader sent half of the team after each Akatsuki pair. Their habit of separating in non-combat situations was one born more out of comfort level than any real desire to confuse pursuers. While Naruto had worked almost exclusively with Kisame and Itachi for 2 years, and while the two teams worked together on occasion for missions requiring greater numbers, for the most part the shinobi sought the company of their partners. It was mostly by necessity, but partially by Hirayama Reiko's desire to have some semblance of control over the more independent shinobi that the unusual nature of the Akatsuki teams developed. Some outsiders might have observed the almost unhealthy dependence the Akatsuki appeared to have on their comrades and commented on its apparent inefficiency. Akatsuki working on missions independently died as often as not. The system itself seemed bound to failure, as shinobi were taught to operate alone, and if they lost that ability, they were thought incompetent. This wasn't precisely true, and considering the lone wolf nature of most of the Akatsuki, the partnerships in themselves were necessary just to keep the shinobi bound together by a common thread, since they lacked the hidden village that gave most ninja a reason to work towards a common goal. Not that all Akatsuki formed such partnerships. Most in fact didn't. There were high numbers of jounin given permanent scouting or guard assignments around and in Kaizen and Akatsuki headquarters, and while such shinobi might gain some camaraderie with their fellows, it wasn't in same league as the bond formed between the teammates of the Akatsuki active. Except for the occasional assistant or major surgery, the medics worked alone, and the council was beyond the comprehension of most people anyway. As a rule, Akatsuki never fought alone. They rarely ate alone. Considering most Akatsuki were in fact criminals in the countries of their origin, overall, they were surprisingly gregarious. There were exceptions, of course, but even Itachi on occasion could be convinced to go to a bar, and Gaara had found a meditation partner in Matsushita-sen, who habitually went out into the wilderness to commune with nature, and didn't object to doing it in company. It was all an illusion. Casual friendships were common, one-night stands even more so, but close relationships among the Akatsuki were all but non-existent. There was simply no room for them, and no real need for them. Everyone already had someone, after all. Kisame wasn't surprised when he and Itachi ended up outside the same restaurant they had eaten at the last time they had been in Konoha, 4 years ago. The food had been good, the service exemplary, and the place served excellent pork dumplings, which Itachi was inordinately fond of. The sushi wasn't bad either, so Kisame had no objections. It was too late for breakfast, and too early for lunch, but the restaurant was open anyway. The hostess blinked once at the sight of their high-collared coats, and Kisame's samahata strapped to his back, but either she was an incredibly good actor or just uninformed, because after a moment she smiled broadly and gestured for them to follow her. The ANBU didn't follow them in, though it was easy enough to sense them around the perimeter of the restaurant, presumably either keeping watch or waiting to step in if things got out of hand. The few other denizens paid them no attention, apparently used to the sight of shinobi armed to the teeth. After both of them ordered, the two ninjas sat in silence while they waited for their food. At least that was how it appeared to the ANBU outside. It didn't occur to them that something was slightly odd about Kisame rhythmically tapping his chopsticks on the tabletop. To them, it just appeared as a sign of impatience, a nervous habit. Itachi's occasional tracing of an unseen design on the table elicited even less attention. It wasn't the code Naruto had learned. That particular signing method had been created so all Akatsuki had a way of communicating silently. It wasn't really a code at all, just a result of working so long and so intensely with someone that the slightest gesture conveyed complete thoughts. Naruto had already started the process with Gaara, but he just thought it meant he was getting better at reading the former Sannin's moods. Despite several tutoring sessions on the subject, Naruto still didn't fully comprehend what it meant to have the blood chakra bond, something all Akatsuki active shared with their partners. It was something of a cross between a summoning jutsu and a binding seal. About a century ago, a brilliant, or completely insane, depended on who you asked, shinobi master created a way to bind people to him in the same way summoning jutsus often made humans the masters of animals. There were several problems with the shinobi master's formula. One was it required someone with a conscious control over their chakra, another was the bond went two ways, as it needed a significant blood sacrifice from both parties involved, presumably because free will came into the equation as it didn't for animal summoning jutsus. In disgust, the shinobi master gave up the idea, but his methods remained documented, secreted in his scroll library and forgotten. Until the former sensei of Hirayama Reiko came across it, and gave it to his student as part of her course of study. The rest was pretty much history. Be it through bribery, manipulation, blackmail or outright deception, a surprising number of shinobi agreed to Reiko's terms for being active in the field. One of those who refused was Orochimaru, who valued his independence more than the promise of power. Two of those who agreed were Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame. They were the youngest and the newest of the 10, now 9 after Orochimaru's departure, though really 8 as Reiko was excluded from the process, with Kisame a mere 3 years older than Itachi, and had been thrown together because neither of their fighting styles were really conducive for working with others. Both of them understood the theory of the blood chakra bond well enough, but Itachi hadn't cared about the implications and Kisame thought he could find ways around them. But the blood chakra bond had been forbidden for a reason, though after its creation it had been used a total of twice and didn't involve human sacrifice. It just happened to be permanent, which Reiko forgot to tell the participants. When Kisame finally found out that the bond was irreversible, he was torn between the two urges to hunt Reiko down and kill her, unlikely, as the first time he'd insulted her to her face she'd broken all the fingers in his right hand before he'd seen her move, and throw up what he'd eaten for lunch. A blood chakra bond sounded like something out of a really, really bad porn novel, one of those sadomasochist ones with heavy bondage. He'd lost less blood throughout the whole ordeal than he usually did after a decent spar, and now he was permanently stuck with a pale pretty boy with family issues. Not to mention he seemed to have all the personality of a rotting grapefruit. It took months for the silence to get anywhere near comfortable. Drawing Itachi into a conversation about anything was difficult. The guy was the brooding hero stereotype, or would have been if he hadn't murdered his entire clan in something less than 6 hours. Gorgeous, powerful, intelligent, and seriously antisocial. The only time Kisame could recall Itachi being the one to initiate a dialogue was about a week after they went on their first mission together. Kisame had been cleaning his samahata, a difficult task, but a strong stain remover helped immensely, and Itachi out of the blue asked him if he could see the sword. The question had been unexpected. Kisame looked at Itachi skeptically. He didn't look capable of getting the samahata off the ground, much less holding it, but that waterfall shinobi Itachi had thrown last week had to have been at least 160 pounds, so maybe. He tossed his sword to Itachi. The former leaf nin caught a hold of the handle a good 2 feet off the ground, but had it in his grip less than 5 seconds before he let go of the samahata like it had bitten him. Kisame gritted his teeth and tried to refrain from an irritated sigh as the still damp blade came to rest on the ground. It had taken him an hour to get the sword clean, and now it was covered in dirt because his partner had a newly discovered case of butterfingers. Kisame, where did you get that sword? As he reached for the samahata and began looking it over for nicks, Kisame scrambled for a response that wouldn't sound either bitter or petulant. Normally Itachi was one of the least bothersome people Kisame knew, but he had gotten his sword dirty, damn it. I've always had the samahata, Itachi-san. The Uchiha looked at him neutrally as he rhythmically flexed and unflexed his fingers. A family heirloom then? I suppose. Kisame shrugged. He personally had no memory of his parents, but he didn't remember when exactly the samahata had come into his possession, so it was as good an explanation as any. Itachi didn't inquire further even after Kisame's less than definite response, but instead asked for some disinfectant and bandages from their supplies. Which even made less sense, really, as Kisame couldn't recall Itachi ever getting wounded on their last mission, but it was hardly an unreasonable request. As Kisame passed the medical supplies to Itachi, this time by hand. No telling if Itachi's clumsiness was a recurring thing, he blinked at the sight of Itachi's left hand, the hand that had briefly held the Samahata. It looked raw, like all the skin had been scrapped off. While the sharkskin sword had a habit of shredding instead of the usual clean cut of most swords, the handle was smooth enough. What the? Had Itachi's hand scrapped the blade by accident? It would sure explain why he had dropped the sword. Still a slightly clumsy move, but much more likely than just dropping it outright. Your sword dislikes me. Now Itachi was assigning human characteristics to inanimate objects. Christ, not only was his new partner girly, he was outright psychotic. Kisame was certainly fond of his sword, it was much better balanced than other weapons its size, but even he didn't attribute sentience to the blade. Itachi-san, I don't think the Samahata has any real preference for it. With a slightly irritated look in his eyes, Itachi resolutely reached over and gripped the blade's handle with his still uninjured right hand. After a moment, he let go, and showed his palm and fingers to Kisame. This time, not only was the skin scrapped off, blood was leaking from the pores. There was a moment where Kisame couldn't think of anything to say. That's never happened before. Has anyone else ever wielded the Samahata? No, but who's ever heard of a sword that does that? And Kisame made a theatrical gesture at Itachi's hands, to people who try and use it. Before I met you, I had never heard of a sword that absorbs chakra either. Kisame had to admit that Itachi had a point. That was pretty much the most involved conversation they shared in the first 2 months of their acquaintance. Anything Kisame found out about Itachi was sporadic and usually accidental. Like when they traveled far north into the mountains, and then Kisame for the first time overheard one of the Uchiha's thoughts. I hate the cold. Hardly something deep and soul revealing, but Kisame knew Itachi wouldn't appreciate it all the same, so he kept his mouth shut about this new development in the bond. It only took a few days after they started out on their partnership for Kisame to gain a grudging respect for Itachi's abilities, but it took much longer for him to realize how far he could push the young leaf renegade before he started to crack, and what exactly set the prodigy off. Families, for one. Itachi had no respect for them, possessed an unnatural loathing for them that seemed out of place in the usually stoic shinobi. There was one eventful month when they had been forced south for a vacation by Reiko-sama, who insisted both of them were too intense for such young people. It turned out to be one of those family beach spots where everyone went after their fathers got a week off from work. Itachi's mouth thinned every time they saw a father playing with his daughter, or worse yet, a young man leading his little brother by the hand. Kisame actually loved the beach. Stupid fish ancestry jokes aside, the swimming was much better in the tropics than it ever had been in the mist country, and the water was much clearer. Better for snorkeling. It had been something of a pleasure to teach Itachi, the Wonder Ninja, how to swim properly. After the Uchiha gained some confidence in the water, he started to enjoy the trip as long as they went to the more isolated places where you didn't run into a toddler every 4 seconds. He especially liked to observe the more dangerous marine animals. Kisame wasn't exactly sure Itachi was more relaxed after the trip was over, but he had certainly lost the too-pale vampire look after spending so much time in the sun, and the sea urchin and rock fish samples he procured were later used as the basis for some homemade poisons, as Itachi didn't trust most shinobi suppliers. Kisame could only roll his eyes at that last. Only Itachi would turn a vacation into a working trip. Small animals? Itachi definitely hated small animals. He was the only person Kisame knew who actually frowned at the sight of kittens and puppies. After a rather prolonged assassination of a prominent family in the Far East, the Lord had a number of hired shinobi at his disposal. Itachi had made a point of slitting the throat of the family dog whose barking had alerted the guards to their presence. People who flirted with him. Kisame quickly got used to being ignored whenever they were in the proximity of anyone with more sex drive than was really healthy. He became equally accustomed to the brutal massacre that inevitably followed when some idiot thought Itachi was just being coy and insisted on invading Itachi's personal bubble. These people were thankfully few, not due so much to Itachi's flat-out refusal of their offers so much as Kisame's presence. Most assumed he was a bodyguard of some sort, and steered clear after he sent a glare their way. Unfortunately, that tactic didn't work on drunks, the local strong men, beautiful women who weren't used to being rebuked, or rich nobles with guards of their own. They had to leave town with some regularity. Kisame learned to order meals that were easy to take with him. There were a variety of other pet peeves, such as the aforementioned cold and people who talked too much, but those were mere irritants, and for the most part didn't end in an eruption of blood and gore. It is a well-known proverb that there's a thin line between genius and insanity. From long experience, Kisame would say that no such line exists. Not that Kisame really minded. Itachi might have been a few cards short of a full deck, but it was the jokers that were missing. Rarely used and hardly missed. Besides, Kisame was fairly sure he himself hardly fit the definition of a sane and stable individual. No shinobi did. And you know what is said about those who live in glass houses. Not that Kisame would really care if someone threw rocks at his apartment, but the expression still applied. Sort of. Something was bothering his partner. At a time when he was usually on his second platter of dumplings, Itachi was systematically mashing the first into a pancake of dough and pork, a slow and tiresome process when one was eating with chopsticks instead of a spoon or fork. Kisame had already made his way through a dozen sushi rolls, a plate of nijirai, half a bottle of sake, and was considering if it would be too rude to order some dessert. The best way to get someone's attention was to take something of theirs without asking. Itachi was no exception, and when Kisame reached across the table to snatch the last remaining dumpling that still held a semblance of its original shape, instinctively the Uchiha blocked the incoming chopsticks with his own, and frowned in a slightly puzzled manner at Kisame. Kisame shrugged. "You aren't eating." Itachi flicked Kisame's chopsticks away. "You don't even like pork dumplings. Do you think we're going to run into that little brother of yours?" Probably. After one last glance at his lunch, Itachi shoved his plate to the side and with grim purpose grabbed the sake bottle and poured some of its contents into his glass. With the aura of one committing a necessary but distasteful act, Itachi threw his head back and downed the liquor in one swallow. Kisame watched this with slightly morbid curiosity. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to be horrified or amused. Itachi always seemed to find it a necessity to be drunk when the topic of family came up. "Itachi-san, this isn't vodka shots. You're supposed to sip sake." Purposefully ignoring him, Itachi slammed the glass back on the tabletop and again reached for the bottle. Kisame was beginning to get a little worried. Though pound for pound Itachi weighed slightly more than Naruto, he drank rarely and his alcohol tolerance was lower. Usually even one glass was enough to give the Uchiha a bit of a buzz. "Itachi-san? I hate this village." The non sequitur threw Kisame briefly off his train of thought. "What?" "Konoha is so weak." The second glass Itachi briefly regarded with disgust before he took a large mouthful and swallowed, coughing slightly as it went down. "And Reiko wants to perpetuate this weakness. Guard it. Help it thrive. She wants it to go on, long after it should have died." So that's what was bothering him. After Itachi's initial outburst back in Kaizen, Kisame thought his partner's silence had seemed a little forced. As Itachi finished his second glass, Kisame, with a pointed look at his partner, took a hold of the sake bottle before Itachi could start groping for it, and poured the last of it into his own glass. As their waitress came up to them and asked them if they wanted anything else, Kisame made sure to order some strong coffee along with their customary dango, too. Despite many rumors to the contrary, coffee in of itself didn't stave off hangovers. However, it was the only beverage with enough punch to cover up the noxious taste of the Akatsuki hangover cure, a mix of various herbs and unnatural substances that help lessen the more unpleasant aftereffects of alcohol. Kisame watched as Itachi tasted the coffee, grimaced, and dumped in liberal amounts of cream and sugar. It was an act he had observed often enough in their 6 years together, though usually the little scene took place in the mornings after a bar run instead of as a preventive measure. Kisame himself didn't drink coffee. It tasted too bitter to him, and he preferred a decent tea over the near-toxic levels of caffeine he found in Itachi's morning beverage. It also made him jittery as hell, while the 5 cups Itachi consumed in the mornings only seemed to give the Uchiha's thought processes a kickstart. The only person Kisame had ever met who was more dependent on the beverage than his partner was Gaara. "Itachi-san, I doubt Reiko-sama's real goal is to ensure the survival of the leaf. She's not exactly the altruistic type. Her true motivations are unfathomable as usual. The cloud would be a much better option for trade opportunities. They have access to a broader range of goods and their lords would be far less suspicious of our intentions. It was also a terrible idea to choose Naruto for this mission. He has far too many connections to this village to be reliable." As fond as Kisame was of the kid, he knew Itachi was right. Naruto hadn't had the violent separation with his village that normally ensured that there would be no divided loyalties. He might not have liked many of the Konoha denizens much, but Naruto guarded friendships fiercely and was slow to let them go. He was also tactless and headstrong, both of which were bad characteristics to find in someone who was supposed to help negotiate a treaty between 2 warring factions. Far too likely to say things he would regret later, by either revealing valuable information or giving insults that could tear the tenuous peace they had with the leaf apart. If the copy ninja hadn't interfered during the meeting in Godame's office, it might have already happened. However, Kisame did find it unlikely that Naruto would just straight up leave the Akatsuki to return to the leaf. He might be a little more pleased than most with the prospect of an alliance, but his relationships formed within the Red Moon were much more recent and longer lasting than any he had created in Konoha, except perhaps for that one teacher the kid mentioned on occasion, the Chunin who used to treat him the ramen all the time. They had hours to waste before their next meeting with Godame was scheduled, so Kisame took his time eating his dessert and periodically raising and lowering his chakra levels to give their ANBU guards something to worry about. He wondered if the Konoha shinobi would let them out alive if the treaty didn't pan out. Probably not. Honor wasn't something the Leaf could afford considering their current war with the Mist and Cloud. Well, at least the food was still tasty. Good to know that something stayed constant even while everything else went to hell. Kisame took a bit of his dango and tried not to think too much about the current state of affairs. He didn't like Konoha any more than Itachi did. Despite his homeland's moniker of the Land of the Bloody Mist, the air in the Leaf smelled far more blood-drenched, seeped in the souls of 1,000 wandering warriors seeking vengeance for their useless deaths. Kisame wondered where Naruto was. Sasuke was obviously still unsure in his evilness. Sakan was sure that was the explanation. He couldn't think of any other reason to use such a ridiculous ending cliché. "I've been dying for a rematch" sounded like something out of a kid's morning cartoon. Honestly, some new material would be appreciated. Sakan already knew he was eternally cursed to serve sadistic Looney Tunes who insisted on applying too much sunscreen, but he at least deserved to serve original sadistic Looney Tunes who didn't use puns. That would be good. "Sakan, am I going to fast for you?" As usual, it was impossible to tell if Sasuke was being sarcastic. The little brat didn't even have the mocking tone down yet, and he'd been apprenticed to Orochimaru for 3-4 years? And the kid was considered a genius. Why? If Sasuke was trying his hand at subtlety, he wasn't doing a very good job. "Of course not, Sasuke-sama. I was just distracted." Sakan was sure to keep his own sarcasm under control. Genius or no, the Uchiha had learned a few things from Orochimaru, none of them pleasant. He kept on moving and didn't bother wondering about Sasuke's vendetta against the Kyuubi kid. Rivalries could get really nasty. Orochimaru's mild obsession with the Sannin Jiraiya was proof enough of that. Naruto was pretty sure a clothing boutique had been there before. The pastry shop looked slightly out of place on the street corner near the clock tower entrance, the sign painted over and peeling. The dim sum sure looked good though, and Naruto's stomach rumbled, reminding him that he hadn't had breakfast and unlike in his childhood, he actually had enough money to go inside and buy whatever he wanted to eat. He glanced to the side at Gaara, who appeared wholly unaffected by the smells wafting from inside the store, but Naruto knew Gaara better than anyone, and the former Sannin's eyes were staring rather fixatedly in the direction of the meat rolls as they cooled on a rack in the corner. Naruto grinned. It was nice to have a group consensus. 2 people were already in the shop when they entered, looking over the small cakes decorated with frosting behind the glass. Though the shop owner frowned at their Akatsuki coats, he didn't seem inclined to lose business by refusing them service and dutifully asked them for their selections. As Gaara in his usual monotone requested 1 curry beef meat roll and 2 barbecue pork, the girl near the cakes, who even from the back looked oddly familiar, turned at the sound of Gaara's voice. She froze at the sight of them, her green eyes wide. Then the boy turned. "Sakura, is something wrong?" He trailed off when he met Gaara's eyes. Naruto's mind froze. Sakura? Sakura. This gorgeous woman was his little Sakura-chan. And who the hell was this guy? They sure looked like they were on a date, but this guy wasn't Sasuke. For one thing, even if Sasuke had an enormous growth spurt, Sakura's date was about 6 inches too tall to be the younger Uchiha. And his hair was too straight. And unless Sasuke had eyebrow implants. Naruto's mind rebooted. Eyebrows. Thick eyebrows. Fuzzy eyebrows? To his irritation, Naruto's voice came out a squeak. But it wasn't so bad, because so did Sakura's when she finally wrenched her eyes away from Gaara. "Naruto?" Iruka stalked down the streets of Konoha, emitting an aura of righteous fury that seemed slightly out of place coming from a man that prided himself on not losing his self-control, a necessity in a teacher of the young. Still clad in his chunin vest and Hittite headband, no one dared to comment on the slightly incongruous sight he made with an armful of grocery bags and a kunai gripped in his teeth. Not that he would have noticed. Iruka was a man on a mission. "This is absolutely the last time I let Genma do the shopping. His lover may have made more money than him, but it didn't give Genma the right to be absolutely useless when it came to anything resembling housework. Or cooking. Or anything useful at all. At least Kakashi had dusted once in a while." Was it really so hard? Iruka didn't ask for much. Just one simple request. Buy the supplies for dinner. He had even given Genma a grocery list. But no, of course it had to be difficult. Nothing could ever be easy with that man. How complicated was it to keep track of a piece of paper? Apparently not as easy as it looked. Iruka had come home from the academy after a long day's work of trying to teach 8-year-olds how to throw shuriken properly, and though he loved the kids dearly, no one in their right mind would enjoy teaching children about the dangers of gripping the edges of sharp objects, only to find Genma already at their apartment, cleaning his kunai and reading a magazine. The groceries were nowhere to be found. Ginma hadn't been even remotely contrite. He had just shot Irika that slow farm boy grin of his, a look bolstered by the toothpick clenched in the Jounin's teeth, gave an unconcerned shrug, and suggested they go out to dinner. Irika hadn't appreciated the proposition. Why did he always end up with the easygoing, lazy ones with talent but not enough common sense to figure out that it might piss off their boyfriends to be so freaking nonchalant about absolutely everything? He needed a vacation. Irika sighed and kept on walking. Not going to happen. The academy exams were coming up soon, and dear God, if he wasn't around, Konoha Maru would probably destroy the practice grounds. That boy was far too proud of the fire jutsu he had mastered recently. Of course, it couldn't hurt if he indulged himself a little. He distinctly remembered a pastry shop being in the immediate vicinity. The one that used to be a clothing boutique. A moment later, he spotted it on the street corner, and changed direction. Ginma could wait. Irika's good mood faded as his proximity to the shop lessened. Something was in the air. Nothing too dangerous, but there was a potential for violence that Irika couldn't ignore. He carefully set his groceries on the ground and grabbed 2 kunai, one from its position in his mouth and the other from his weaponry pouch. His battle sense may have gotten rusty from too many years in the classroom, but Irika was still a shinobi. He crept towards the shop, staying in the shadows, ears straining to hear something, anything that would alert him to the situation he was about to walk into. There was nothing at first. Then a quiet something. Irika moved closer. There were no voices coming from the building, which was rather worrying in itself, but the sound of someone chewing wasn't what Irika expected, with so much tension thickening the air, making it seem more difficult to breathe. As Irika peered through the window, he identified 2 of the inhabitants immediately, a simple enough task considering they were faced in his general direction, and one of them was a former student. Even with the dread that came with the shock stark on Sakura's face, Irika felt a small grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. He immediately squelched it. Satisfaction in his correction evaluation of the situation wasn't something to take joy in, even if it did prove he wasn't as rusty as he remembered. Irika wasn't sure what to make of Rock Lee's thoughtful expression. He didn't know the boy well enough to tell how bad the situation was by how the young Jounin was acting. But the sight of the coats the strangers wore was enough to make the blood drain from Irika's face. Akatsuki? Only the Akatsuki wore the coats ornamented with the red clouds. There was no way in hell Irika was prepared to deal with this. He quickly began running a mental checklist through his mind of the ANBU patrol schedules and which would be closest to his position, before something he had forgotten soundly kicked Irika in the back of the head. Idiot, they're members of the Akatsuki delegation who arrived yesterday. They're not here to kill anyone. The Chunin relaxed his grip on the knives in his hands with a sigh. Ginma had told us about the negotiations 3 days ago, but he'd been grading papers at the time and hadn't been paying attention. Gods, he was stupid. He'd gotten all worked up for nothing. Then something sharp pricked his jugular. Irika froze. Drop the kunai. Irika let the knife slip through his fingers and fall to the ground, the sound of impact muffled by the sand covering the street. He kept silent as his unknown assailant patted him down for additional weaponry, but Irika made sure with his tongue to loosen the needle glued to the roof of his mouth. Now a choice had to be made. Did he go for the eyes and hope to blind his attacker, or the throat? Unexpectedly, the weapon pointed at the major artery in his neck was pulled away, and the man at his back walked around to face him. Irika, what the hell are you doing here? Irika did not remember hearing the man's voice before, and the ANBU wolf mask rendered the man's features unrecognizable, but the tonal inflections of the shinobi addressing him seemed somewhat familiar. Almost certainly a friend of Ginma's. I sensed something inside the building and went to investigate. A chuckle emanated from the ANBU. That's very noble of you, Irika, but you should really leave this kind of thing to those trained for it. Despite the truth in the ANBU's statement, Irika couldn't help feel a little irritated at the condescending tone. Thank you for the advice, but I was able to realize that on my own. So, and Irika gestured to the inside of the shop, are you guarding the Akatsuki representatives? Yeah. Don't know exactly why though. We're not inconspicuous enough to be effective spies with this level of shinobi, and if the Akatsuki decide to pull something, we don't really have the power to stop them. But a mission is a mission. I'd better get back to my post. Make sure not to try and take on the Red Moon by yourself, alright? Still laughing quietly under his breath, the ANBU faded easily into the shadows. Irika realized with a start that he had bitten through his lower lip in an effort to refrain from saying the first thing that came to mind, as the first thing had been far from complimentary, involving snobby ANBU, their pets, and what they did with them in the darker hours of the night. With a quiet curse that he never would have uttered in front of his students, the Chunin bent and retrieved his kunai from the ground, wiping them down with a cleaning cloth and returning them to his weaponry pouch. His face set in a stubborn grimace that he had unknowingly passed to Naruto years ago. Irika determinedly made way for the pastry shop doorway. There may not be any danger, but he still hadn't gotten his raspberry tart. The inhabitants were still staring at each other as Irika entered. The chewing sounds Irika had heard from outside were coming from the scarlet-haired Akatsuki, a short, wiry young man with a half-eaten curry beef meat roll in hand. That one by far seemed the most unperturbed with the silent standoff, looking only mildly curious with the proceedings before him as he swallowed the last of the meat roll and reached in his bag for another. Sakura did a double take upon his entrance, at first only glancing at him out of the corner of her eye in the manner of one not daring to expose her back to the enemy, and then staring at him wide-eyed, as if she couldn't believe he was there. Irika was a little confused. He knew a few of his younger students were always surprised when they saw him outside the classroom, believing as they did that their teacher couldn't possibly have a life outside the academy, but Sakura had always had a level head on her shoulders and her blatant shock at his appearance was rather unexpected. He smiled gently at her. "Good to see you, Sakura. How have you been?" "Irika-sensei?" "Irika-sensei." Startled by a voice addressing him from the Akatsuki side of the room, Irika turned and stared. He personally had very few memories of the fourth. The man had died when he was 8 years old, and he had only met the Hokage once. But there were numerous photos of him, yondaime memorialized in libraries and weaponry shops and homes all across Konoha. This boy was like the fourth come back from the dead. Except he wasn't. The dark whisker-like facial tattoos were something only one shinobi had ever possessed. Good God. He didn't realize he had spoken out loud until the blonde Akatsuki's face broke out in a broad grin. "Irika-sensei, it is you!" The voice was wrong. Far too deep, and lacking the childishness Irika remembered. But only one student had ever sounded so elated to see him, as if his mere presence was something to be treasured. Naruto. The boy may have been the vessel of the Kyuubi who killed Irika's parents. He may have left the leaf and consigned Irika to 4 years of heartache. He may have joined an organization made up of the most murderous assassins alive, but the shinobi before him was most definitely Naruto. And that was all that mattered. Naruto's joy faded into worry for Irika as his former teacher's eyes brimmed over in tears. "Irika-sensei, are you all right?" He didn't have time to say anything else as Irika took 2 steps forward and enveloped Naruto in his arms. "Naruto. Oh God, Naruto, you're alive, you're alive." A moment later, he felt Naruto carefully return the hug. Irika felt the pang of years lost. The boy had grown up without him. 4 years ago, there would have been no restraint in the Naruto's embrace. "Yeah, Irika-sensei, I am. And I'm so sorry for not telling you." Naruto looked up at him, still an inch or 2 shorter than his old instructor. This time, the worry was not for Irika, but for himself. "Will you forgive me?" "I already have." With no warning, Kankuro stopped dead where he stood. Temari turned back to her brother in irritation. Their groceries were getting heavy, both of them had slept past the time when breakfast would have been at all appropriate, and Temari was more than ready for lunch. "What is it now, Kankuro? You've been twitchy all morning. Can't you feel it?" "Feel what?" "That wave of cloying sweetness. Of oversaturated sappiness." Kankuro shuddered. Temari stared at him blankly. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Imagine eating a bag of Peeps, in 5 minutes flat and having most of the sugar stick to your face." Now Temari shuddered. She had actually done that in Easter some dozen years ago, and had been sick for hours. She still had occasional nightmares of a gigantic marshmallow bunny eating her whole. Though it seemed to her that Kankuro was just having hallucinations as a result of his lingering hangover and subsequent dehydration, Temari could emphasize with what he was experiencing. "Where is the feeling coming from?" "The pastry shop over there." Indeed, it was a pastry shop. Temari could smell the baked goods from here, though they lacked the overwhelming sugar smell Kankuro had described. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her yet again that it was almost noon, and she still hadn't eaten anything today. "While we're here, we might as well grab something to eat." She had barely made it 3 steps before Kankuro grabbed the back of her shirt and started dragging her backwards. Quickly shifting all the groceries to one arm, Temari unslung her fan and slapped Kankuro rather roughly across the face. He staggered backwards and tripped over an unevenness in the paved street. She stared down at her younger brother in a confused fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Without his makeup, the mark left by the fan's impact was much more apparent. Sometimes it was a little unsettling to see so much of their father in Kankuro, but the panicked look was something she had never witnessed in the Kazekage. "There's something in there." Yeah, some barbecue pork meat rolls that I intend to have for lunch. Now get up and stop being bizarre. Could you do that for 5 minutes? Muttering under his breath about pushy older sisters, Kankuro nevertheless pushed himself to his feet and followed her towards the pastry shop, though he didn't look happy about it. As they grew closer to the shop, Temari began to feel uneasy. There was something undeniably familiar about the chakra emanating from the building. She soon found out why as she pushed open the door and witnessed the embrace of two men she didn't know, though both were obviously ninja. Slightly uncomfortable with the sight, she had nothing against homosexuals, but she really would have appreciated it if they kept their affection at home. Temari's eyes shifted to the left. And there was Gaara, staring at her calmly as he licked his fingers clean of the last of the meat roll he had been eating. Hello, big sister. Sakan was bored. He didn't really mind doing nothing for hours on end, but it was tiresome to stand guard while Sasuke drowsed in the sun. He was also edgy. It may not have been enemy territory for the Uchiha, but it certainly was for him, and he tensed at the passing of each Anbu patrol. Some lunch would have been nice too, but he habitually left most of his supplies scattered around the edges of the forest surrounding Konoha to evade detection, and all the food he had on him was some dried fruit and a few soldier pills. Sakan tried to satisfy himself with the fruit as he glanced with longing at the pastry shop only a few hundred yards away. He couldn't smell the pastries from here, but the place looked very popular. The Sounin felt a brief moment of envy for those who could wander freely throughout Konoha. Banishing those impossible thoughts that did nothing but distract him, Sakan settled down to wait for his master to wake up and continue his search for the rival he had thought dead. It wasn't the Dango's fault, really. It wasn't even Itachi's, though watching the Uchiha down 6 cups of coffee in a row, and dear God, he hadn't even put sugar in the last 3, did nothing for Kisame's appetite. He just didn't like eating with an audience. Even the tea, ordered after it became apparent that Itachi wasn't going to move anytime soon, tasted bitter, left a sour, sticky residue, an aftertaste that lingered unpleasantly. It wasn't the ANBU. Kisame at least knew where they were, as they weren't doing all that much to hide their chakra signatures. These spectators were new to the game. But they were better than the ANBU, hid their chakra entirely, and that made Kisame a little twitchy. He absent-mindedly drummed his fingers on the tabletop once, twice, but forcibly stopped himself. Nervous habits were fine as long as they were feigned. Not so when they weren't. Not only was it a weakness, it made him predictable. Which was also a weakness. Whatever. Itachi didn't appear to notice anything. He was concentrating so hard on the bottom of his coffee cup that Kisame briefly contemplated informing his partner that tea leaves were the preferred method of divination, but shook off the impulse. Quips were only worth it with an appreciative audience, and Naruto wasn't anywhere within the vicinity. He couldn't even tell where the onlookers were located. Sometimes Kisame wished he had spent a little more time on his genjutsu skills, if only to improve his perception, but it had never really seemed necessary, especially after he had been partnered with Itachi, a prodigy of an elite school of ocular ninjutsu who saw through everything. They were always together. Kisame couldn't recall a time in the past 6 years when one of them had gone into a fight alone, and who needed 2 pairs of eyes when one sufficed. Of course, the Sharingan didn't do much good when Itachi wasn't using it. Itachi-san? Behind you. Second shop to the right. A man and a woman. Jounin. We fought them before. That being said, even without the use of his Sharingan, Itachi's chakra sense was much more acute than Kisame's own. They had been to Konoha once in the entirety of their partnership. In that interval, they had battled 7 shinobi, 2 of them genin and 1 far beyond Jounin. Kakashi seemed unlikely. The Loud One's expertise lay obviously within the realm of taijutsu. That left 2. Whether possessed amazing precognitive skills or realized they had been discovered, because they strolled out of the shop like they hadn't been spying on the Akatsuki, the woman, Kurenai, that was what Itachi had named her, with a coat slung over one shoulder, the man toying with a cigarette. Kisame's lips involuntarily curled into a snarl. Asuma. He really shouldn't hold anything against the man. The fight had hardly been personal. Before that day, they had never met before, Asuma only knowing Kisame by reputation, Kisame not even having that much. Even so, the scar still hadn't entirely healed, as chakra weapon scars never did, broke open and bled at the slightest opportunity. As it did now, a trail of blood rolling down his cheek as he tried to restrain himself from doing anything. Kisame didn't notice the discomfort, though he thoughtlessly wiped the blood away before it managed to drip from his chin. His eyes never shifted from the tabletop. Sometimes a good sense of smell was far more useful than eyesight. And far less conspicuous. They entered the restaurant, chattering far too earnestly for their act to appear natural, even if their previous encounter hadn't already made it obvious that neither shinobi were much for idle talk. Sloppy. Sitting down across the room, Kurenai cheerily ordered a plate of tempura, 1. Asuma, sounding far too relaxed, quietly requested some yakitori, 2. As soon as the waitress had left, both Konoha and Ninja fell silent. Itachi sipped his coffee. Kisame's tea cooled on the table. This was probably the point where a confrontation should have occurred, but it wasn't going to. Truces really tended to kill fight scene opportunities. The pastry shop was starting to get crowded. Not that the owner minded all that much. Buying something was the most apparent route to stave off the inevitable conflicts brewing, so business was doing pretty good, and even if there was some property damage involved, he had ninja insurance. Living in Konoha, it was something of a necessity. Of course, after Iruka and Naruto had finished their teary greeting, aka the disturbingly gay-seeming but actually platonic hug, there were questions. A lot of them. Mostly on Sakura and Iruka's end. Kankuro and Temari were still recovering from the shock, and Lee was stuffing his face with rum balls, intent on getting as close as he could to drunk, considering all the bars were closed. This might not have been the best idea with so many agitated shinobi in the room, but this was Lee. Hammered was the only way he stood a chance against the Akatsuki if things got a little precarious. Or maybe he just didn't feel up to dealing with this situation sober. Whichever. So, how've you been? Of course, just because Iruka and Sakura were asking questions didn't mean their queries would be all that meaningful. Alright, I guess. The Akatsuki? Or coherent? What about them? A helpless gesture from Iruka. He was obviously uncomfortable with the subject. Sakura was not so much. You betrayed Konoha, you betrayed your friends, you let us think you were dead for years. What do you mean, what about them? What not about them, you ask? For the most part, Naruto did not have a sarcastic side. His anger rarely ran cold. Someone needed to offset Gaara and Itachi's generally icy demeanors, and Kisame had too thoughtful a personality to be a decent counterpoint. But even Naruto, surrounded by those who, if not emotionless, at least had an unnatural control over their passions, had learned the advantages of impersonal enmity. Sakura didn't mean much by her insults, if anything at all. Her relief and worry just had a tendency to manifest itself in a temper. Those close to her knew this. Naruto hadn't been comrades with Sakura in over 4 years, and in his most recent experience, rarely was anything said in jest. So he responded in kind, though not in anger, his clenched fists relaxing and the furrow between his eyes smoothing out. For a moment, his expression frighteningly mirrored Itachi's. Sakura-san, I can't tell you anything about the Akatsuki. We tried to keep ourselves as anonymous as possible. Sakura stared at him, open-mouthed. Naruto. The blonde ninja gave a slight shrug. Sorry. Naruto walked out of the shop. No one moved to stop him. Iruka and Sakura were too paralyzed, too disoriented by Naruto's uncharacteristic, to them, demeanor, Lee too unsure. Kankuro and Temari hadn't been involved in the situation at all. It was Gaara who broke the silence. Do you want to talk? The question was directed at Temari. Blinking out of her shock, the fan wielder nodded. It would be best if we went somewhere private. A glance at Kankuro. Our apartment isn't too far away. It took 2 nudges and a very sharp elbow to the ribs for Kankuro to snap out of his stupor and get a clue. Yeah? Well, the puppeteer had never been prized for his eloquence. Good thing Temari did most of the talking anyway. Then they left as well, the door shutting barely with a whisper, only a quiet click as the doorknob turned. The shop wasn't so crowded anymore, but more silent than it should have been. And though Iruka thought about pursuing Naruto, his former student's eyes had seemed so distant, so alien, so not Naruto in the moments he had addressed his former teammate, that Iruka hesitated. The boy had grown up without him. He no longer knew what to say, because no words coming from him would be right, as they once would have been. So Iruka stayed where he was, feeling oddly abandoned, as though his place had been usurped by another. Sakan had fallen into a sort of half-doze brought on by tedium and the nice warm sun when a sudden presence melted his lethargy away, startling him to a point that he nearly fell out of the tree. The sound Nin had never been particularly adept at reading chakra signatures, but a side effect of his training in sound jutsus had given him a finely tuned ear, unnaturally so. Chakra vibrated when enough of it accumulated in one place, which often gave Sakan an edge in determining if in fact a technique actually was powerful enough to merit dodging, or just required a simple deflection. So it was now, but never before had he felt so much of it. Orochimaru and the third had generated a similar amount in their encounter 4 years ago, but then it had been limited, focused on jutsu requiring a great deal of concentration. Not so now. This was indefinite, but constant, a never-ending pulse that reverberated through the air, coming from the direction of the shop. Enough to make Sakan's teeth ache. Sasuke opened one drowsy eye. Even half-lidded, his gaze was piercing. What is it? How to describe it? Sasuke had never developed any particular interest in sound jutsus, preferring instead to rely on his strengths. It was something of a weakness to leave one of the senses so underdeveloped, but Sasuke had always relied on Sakan for his ears. Most of the time it worked, but in instances like this, it was like trying to describe color to the blind. Best stick to small words. Someone leaving the pastry shop has an inordinate amount of chakra. How much? As much as Orochimaru-sama when he fought the third. It was then that one eardrum cracked. Sakan hissed quietly, as the lightest trickle of blood made its way down the side of his face. This wasn't good. Maybe a little more. Sasuke immediately pushed himself into a light crouch, his eyes fading to red. The only identifying characteristic Sakan could see from this distance was the Akatsuki cloak, but one thing the Uchiha had concentrated on was improving his eyesight, if only to make it easier to copy jutsus at greater distances. After a moment, Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Naruto. This was ridiculous. He had stomped off like a 3-year-old just because Sakura, of all people, had insulted him. Big deal. Back when they had worked together, she called him everything under the sun, most of it uncomplimentary. But here he was, 4 years without seeing her, and he had lost his Sakura immunity. Naruto had to chuckle at this. He made Sakura sound like a disease or something. Well, maybe a variety of leech. He just wasn't used to it anymore. Gaara didn't insult people. Whatever he said, he believed to be true. Gaara didn't aim to hurt with his words. Or at least, he had never really tried to hurt Naruto. No one did. The last person to so blatantly